Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for day two of our Responsible AI in 2025 State of the Art and Future Directions Conference. We will get started in just a moment. My name is Leah Sabatini, and I'm the Program Director for Good Systems. And I will tell you what we have in store for today. Today, we'll be focusing on responsible AI in the information environment, responsible AI and privacy, and responsible AI and user needs. And we'll close out with a keynote from our chair, Dr. Ken Fleischmann. We're looking forward to kicking off. I'll go ahead and turn it over to our first panel of the day, which is going to be moderated by Dr. Matt Leese. Matt, if you want to take us away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leah. So, welcome everyone to today's opening panel on responsible AI and the information environment. I think we all appreciate the importance of having access to reliable information in our personal and professional lives, as well as the risks we face when the quality of that information is compromised. For example, the spread of unreliable information can lead to dangerous volatility in our financial markets, as well as risks to personal and public health. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we faced the challenge of continually evolving and often conflicting information that made it challenging to respond effectively. Other notable risks include the spread of unreliable information during national disasters, which can delay getting aid to those impacted, or the use of online influence campaigns by foreign adversaries to sow domestic strife and undermine democratic election processes. In considering the role of responsible AI in the context of the information environment, we must think about the potential of AI to help strengthen the resilience of our information environment, as well as the new risks it poses. Like people, AI technologies are fallible, and generative AI technologies can now produce content that appears to be very high quality, yet contains significant inaccuracies. Such errors are often inadvertent, but in the case of bad actors, generative AI can be abused to produce deep fakes or other deceptive content. Guardrails instituted to prevent misuse can often be thwarted. On the other hand, as modern AI transforms work in many sectors, there is also new potential for information analysts, public health officials, and journalists to leverage these new AI capabilities to further accelerate and strengthen their work. AI can also be harnessed to continuously monitor our information environments and rapidly expand at scale when new threats or risks are detected. We are fortunate today to have a leading set of scholars working at the intersection of responsible AI and the information environment, and I'll invite them all to come on video at this time. I anticipate a great conversation today as we have the opportunity to hear their perspectives on where we are and our future outlook. To get started, I'd like to invite each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their own work. And why don't we get started with Maria, followed by Greg, and then Jesse.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I am Maria Arteaga. I'm an associate professor in the Data Analytics, Technology, and AI department at ISADA Business School. And what my work focuses on, broadly speaking, is how do we evaluate and develop machine learning algorithms and socio-technical systems for responsible human AI augmentation. In the context of information integrity, it takes the form of seeking to understand what are the risks and the opportunities of using AI to support fact-checking and content moderation. With a special focus in the context of fact-checking, I've been particularly focused on the question of check-worthiness, deciding from all of the information and all of the content that is online, what should be fact-checked, what is worthy of fact-checking. And so, for instance, one of the questions that I've asked there is, can LLMs help us for this task? I've also looked into improving fairness in the context of content moderation algorithms. And most recently, I've also started looking at measuring representational biases in the context of generative AI.
Thank you, Maria. Next up, Greg, please.
All right, thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks to Good Systems and Leah and everyone for hosting, and thanks Matt for convening this panel. I think the topic here is really, really important. So a lot of my work has focused on broadly the discipline of natural language processing and kind of thinking about how to do various processing tasks on top of human language data. And so for a long time, we were trying to do things like just be able to summarize text accurately, and models were not really able to do that. Back 10 years ago, you couldn't even kind of generate a one sentence summary of a news article without introducing some kind of an error. Um, Now we're in a very different place today. But a lot of the ways that we think about identifying errors in what language processing systems produce actually is kind of relevant for the current conversation around our information environment and also the kinds of misinformation that bad actors might produce. Um, so there's kind of separate but related challenges in the field of, let's call it LLM fact checking, trying to identify whether outputs from LLMs like ChatGPT might contain incorrect information. And I guess what I'll call human fact checking or political fact checking, where we look at statements made by people and try to tell them apart, in terms of whether or not they're correct. So on the LLM side, my group's work has focused a lot on building systems to identify factual errors. And a lot of times this assumes that you have some kind of source of truth. For example, you're asking Adobe to answer questions about your PDF, right? And you want it to report accurately the kind of information that's in your PDF and maybe conclusions that you can draw from that information. So my group has done work on training models, which are themselves LLMs, to help detect these kinds of errors, usually by breaking down the things that are generated into small pieces and then identifying whether each of those pieces is correct or not. Now, as part of collaboration with Good Systems and in other work, we've looked at whether that same approach can also work for political fact checking and whether it can help human fact checkers do the same kind of thing. So what we've seen is that when you have a political fact checker taking a complex political claim and trying to kind of make sense of it, you need to do the same process of breaking down what are the kind of assumptions going on here, what are the conclusions being drawn, what information is that rooted in. And so that's kind of the same sort of process that we use, basically decomposing things, trying to figure out how to check them, and then trying to produce an actual answer. So large language models have a role to play here as well. I think the conversation today is going to get into sort of the tangled interdependencies of all of these things, like, humans using LLMs to check other humans and LLMs checking that things that humans write and stuff like that. And I think that it's more important than ever when we have so many kind of inputs that we're getting all the time, and we need to make sense of some really complicated information that's coming back. So with that, I'll hand it off. Thank you.
We've heard from Spain and from New York. Let's turn a little local. So here in Texas, Jesse, please let us hear a little bit about yourself and your work.
Hi from Austin. It's great to be here. This is going to be a really fun panel, so thanks to the organizers and Matt. I am here associate professor in the linguistics department. I work on computational linguistics and natural language processing, and I mean that literally, meaning that I do work on both of these different, same but kind of different sides towards this kind of problem that we're discussing today. So I can start with on a little bit more computational linguistics side, where we mostly study pragmatics. And the idea is what kind of the meaning of what we are trying to say at any given point of time. Actually, it depends a lot on the context of how we're saying things and the intention of ourselves. It seems a little bit obvious, but what that means is actually language changes in subtle ways, and sometimes even we ourselves are not even aware of the ways that our language has changed. So one question that we have been studying is how do we capture such subtle changes and get to kind of the actual intention and kind of the subtext that's being expressed. And for example, one thing we have looked into is kind of linguistic intergroup bias. A slightly more generalized version of that is, for example, when kind of you and the audience are, or the interlocutors are in kind of slightly different groups and kind of taking slightly different perspectives, it turns out kind of the subtle changes involve like the frequency of pronouns that you're using in the text that you're or in the utterances that you're saying. So these are kind of the things that we hope to capture, and these reflect things like, are you actually being completely cooperative? What kind of emotions do you express in the text? And it turns out with relate to artificial intelligence, large language models aren't necessarily amazing at these very subtle changes and expressions in language. I guess on the natural language processing side, my main interest is whether large language models themselves can maintain accurate information, or at least be useful in kind of promoting the integrity of information. And I particularly work in very high stake domains. So in particular, medicine and sometimes science. And kind of in medicine, for example, one challenge that we have seen repeatedly with relate to kind of fact checking is sometimes in other domains, let's say news, you generalize a little bit and summarize and omit some information, and that's kind of okay. But it's really not okay in medicine a lot of the times. Kind of this maintenance of like the accuracy of information is kind of there are relevant pieces in medicine that makes it extremely important. And it's not necessarily the case that the language models are aware of these kind of subtleties. So what we have been trying to understand is to what extent the LLMs are accurate when relaying such high-stake information to users who may or may not be able to craft a good query to the language model itself. And we have seen a lot of challenges, both kind of using language models to reflect the information inside a document, as well as using language models for fact-checking in those high-stake cases. So with that, yeah, I'll hand back to Matt.
So as a panel, I'll go ahead as moderator and ask some of the questions to get us started today. We do invite audience questions. So if you want to post questions in the webinar feature, I think you can also upvote questions that you would like to have answered. And then I'll read back some of those audience questions at the end of the session today. So to get us started, thanks everyone for your great opening remarks. Let's start with the big fish. What do you guys see as the greatest opportunities and challenges before us right now as we think about the intersection of responsible AI and the information environment? And maybe let's get started with Greg.
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, I kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think just to offer a bit more context, I think that there's just this plethora of information that we're kind of receiving about all sorts of issues. And I think a couple years ago, the way I probably would have answered this is like, LLMs are a little bit of a sideshow. Like, there are these kind of widely publicized kind of misinformation campaigns around various things, and most of this is sort of originated by human bad actors. Maybe they're using some kind of automated tools, but I think you can do a lot with tools from 10 years ago, and you didn't necessarily need the kind of latest and greatest language models. I will say that's certainly a big problem, right? Like, if someone wants to kind of put forth some sort of, let's say conspiracy theory about something, they can put out a lot of information on the web, kind of flood the zone on social media, and suddenly it looks like there's a debate about something which might have been previously considered to be a settled scientific issue. So I'd say that's kind of challenge one, like, kind of humans who want to propagate something, using a lot of different resources available on the web in order to do that. I think challenge two that I think has really started to emerge in the last year or so is the rise of, let's say, misinformation that arises from chatbots. And I think that can be malicious or non-malicious. So uh, there have been a number of these sort of cases talked about in popular press articles. There was one in the Times, I think maybe a couple months ago, about a guy who was talking with ChatGPT, and ultimately it sort of convinced him that he had discovered a new branch of mathematics related to cryptography. And, he was writing to the NSA about his discoveries. And what was very interesting to me about this story was that he repeatedly asked the language model, like, okay, but I'm not a mathematician. Isn't it sort of implausible that I would have discovered this? And this sycophancy behavior of the language model sort of emerged and actually said, oh no, the fact that you're questioning that means that you're just the right person to come up with this or whatever. Spoiler alert, it wasn't actually a new branch of mathematics. And the other interesting thing I found was that he just took what he had done and put it into Gemini and asked it, is this all right? And Gemini said, no, sorry. So, there's a little bit of like LLMs helping him pull himself out of it as well. But I think that's that, I think that's also like, in some ways, a new flavor of the problem that's like a little more frightening, and that like everyone here has good intentions. Like, I don't think OpenAI like wanted this to happen. Like this guy, was actually kind of reasonably smart in his ability to pull himself out of this, but like yet this still happened. So I guess, yeah, two things like the kind of, coordinated misinformation campaigns, that's maybe not new, but maybe has a different flavor. And then this kind of sycophantic language models, like potential for real bad problems there.
Let me maybe ask you a quick follow on, Greg. In regard to the first problem of LLM generated stuff, is that something that we can detect or track very well online? I think that's something you've looked at a little bit in terms of the challenges there.
Yeah, so I mean, there's an interesting sort of evolving conversation around that. So one kind of technological piece that's been in place there, but hasn't really been widely used is watermarking. Where so for example, Scott Aronson from UT Austin visited OpenAI and kind of did this work on how you can kind of change what tokens come out very, very slightly, and then you could tell that the model that the text was generated from ChatGPT. As far as I know, we don't believe that they are doing that. Um, However, there are sort of independent tools like Pangram, which allow us to, with quite high reliability, detect whether things have been generated by these language models using various features. And so this was, for example, recently used in the iClear conference, which has a public review system to tell how many reviews are kind of likely to be AI generated. There are increasing tools that allow us to address this. But if you're a bad actor who really wants to kind of mask your steps, there are ways you could do that. If you're not using vanilla ChatGPT, if you're using something that you trained yourself, it's still possible to cover your tracks. So a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. If some kid's going to dump his homework into ChatGPT, that's the kind of thing which we maybe, get to a point where we can reliably detect. But a state actor who wants to generate misinformation, if they had enough resources, unlikely that we would be able to detect that with current means.
Perfect. Maria, Jesse, who wants to jump in next?
I can jump in. I think when thinking about the challenges right now, for me, the biggest challenge relates to the pathways and levers that we have for change, to affect change. When we think about responsible AI in the context of information integrity or any other context, these responsible, what it aims to do is we want to identify potential societal harms and steer things away from that, and then identify things that could be societally impactful in positive ways and steer things towards that. And we need to have the levers to steer. And I think one of the biggest questions that I've been grappling with recently is, what do those levers look like right now in the context of my own work? And I think a lot of what computer science has done, for example, I think that we've largely contributed in two forms, either characterizing certain risks so that we can inform the conversation in terms of what do we need to steer away from, and that steering would have to be in the form of policymaking and regulating. And alternatively, and this is where we've also done a lot of, is look, here are technological solutions, here are alternative AI technologies that can mitigate certain harms that we've identified. And that requires either regulation that creates the incentives to adopt that technology, or companies wanting to pursue that positive impact in their own because of their own intention. And there are many cases where it just turns out there's a lot of incentives for things that may not be as responsible and that may cause societal harms. We've seen the fact that information bubbles and echo chambers and things that create outrage, that all creates a lot of clicks. And for a lot of companies, a lot of clicks translate to a lot of money. And so there's a lot of contexts where the incentives are not necessarily there for the companies to adopt these new technologies that may be more responsible, and in contexts where governments are uninterested in regulating these, there's the question of what are our levers to affect change. And I think that in the context of information integrity, this is exacerbated by the fact that before we even know what direction we want to steer things in, we need to understand the problem. And the way that we understand problems is through research. As like Greg just did a fantastic job characterizing some really big questions and really new threats that exist that we are only beginning to understand. And there is a big risk right now in terms of the funding of research in information integrity, in terms of researchers that study misinformation, for example, facing harassment. And so the conditions to even begin to study this problem are very precarious at a moment where we're facing this technology that is massively disrupting our information ecosystem in ways that can create a lot of different societal harms. So that's the thing that I would say I'm most concerned about at the moment.
So I hear a big problem. What can we do about it, right? When we have these large incentives that aren't aligned, is there anything we can do to get any traction at all on this really thorny, entrenched problem?
Yeah, I think that the solutions may look different in different places. I think that I've generally been very optimistic about the fact that a lot can happen through policymaking. And I think that in general, when it comes to new technologies, I think people often feel like, well, but are we just trying to catch up to things? And I think that there's a lot of examples where when we contrast what happens in different countries, for example, and we look at what happens in a country that has robust regulation around privacy and what happens in a country that doesn't, we do see very material differences, right? So I think that in a lot of different contexts, there's still a lot of room for these to happen. And so I think that that's definitely still a pathway that is important. I do think that the question of what is it that collectives can do to protect themselves, what are ways in which as citizens we can engage and can collectively steer things. I think that that's a direction where there's been a little bit of work, but there's a lot more to be done where I think it's becoming increasingly important.
Yeah, Jesse?
Yeah, I definitely echo what previously Greg and Maria has been saying. Just want to add a little bit of comment on the kind of maybe the role of humans in this era. And in particular, I feel like there is this gap between kind of the computer scientists and the industry companies rushing to develop large language models that top leaderboards versus the very kind of human style questions that we are actually concerned about. And for example, one thing we have looked into quite recently is when we actually talk to practitioners and users in evidence-based medicine, where they're either kind of doctors in hospitals or like lay users, the kind of questions that they ask language models take a very different shape. It's it's not very much like, oh, we have the best system possible and the language model is all powerful, then we solve all of our problems. I think I feel like there's a lot of room that we can build bridges between a more human-centered and user-centered view, and how do we actually kind of make language models to be really useful to take care of this side. And uh, Another example that I have experienced in the classroom, I think last year, was I was trying to organize this seminar about the social impact of large language models, and I had half of my students were kind of computer scientists, and another half were students from other disciplines. And it was kind of very encouraging to see that they actually kind of really engage with each other and kind of discuss what are the challenges from different perspectives. And I think that is a platform we should keep fostering. And I feel like that's somehow a little bit missing. And kind of the consequence for that, I think, is kind of, we talk about alignment a lot these days. We talk about safety a lot these days, and somehow I feel like people are talking about safety from like the AI's perspective, where the AI is going to destroy humanity. But on the other hand, I feel like, there's this human kind of way of thinking, and there's human need, and there's human language. The language models are really not trying, like, they're not capturing. They're kind of, we as a field really build on, like, cooperative dialogue, and a lot of those principles are in the models, and a lot of safety constraints. But when we actually use models to kind of do certain things, they don't truly understand the human intention in all the subtle ways that humans, express themselves. So I think there's still this big challenge and a gap, and I think lots of exciting things can happen there.
I think everywhere we turn and look these days, we're hearing about generative AI and large language models. And I'm monitoring the question queue, and you might be unsurprised to hear, questions around different aspects of that. So maybe we can zoom in a little bit more around generative AI and see if there's other parts of the conversation we haven't gotten to. So if we think about more about, again, generative AI, are there more particular opportunities or risks we should be thinking about in this space, or other ways we can better optimize the benefits of these technologies while minimizing the risks in this context of safeguarding our information environment? Maybe Jesse, since you were just telling us a little bit about LMs on the human side, you could get us started.
Yeah, I guess one thing I think our land has been rapidly changing is the amount of AI generated content uh, everywhere that we see. I think there was an article, I think earlier this month or last month, about how AI has been used in kind of journalism in the United States. And very recently, I think there is this hot kind of discussion on X about the use of generative AI in kind of conference, large-scale machine learning kind of conference submission and review process. I think kind of the one I think big problem that I've kind of been thinking about is the presence of this kind of AI generated text. And the reason here is that kind of they generate slop. So the kind of slop they generate, sometimes it's like very unnatural, and the kind of the more you see it, the more you can identify it. And we have actually looked into why that's the case. And repeatedly, we have been seeing kind of language models are very homogeneous. So they produce a similar kind of structure of sentences, not the exact same words, but the kind of linguistic structure that they use in the text that they generate are similar to each other. We also have seen, when you use language models to do creative writing, for example, they kind of tend to repeat the same kind of plot, where kind of it's kind of adapted to each scenario. But then if you really take a close look, you see that they kind of answer the same kind of questions in sequence. And I think that's kind of really a challenge about the landscape of what we are of just information in general. When more and more data that gets out there, more and more of this kind of data gets ingested into the large language model training, and as we kind of educate kids and think about how they grow up in this environment, I feel like I think this is a very big risk, that's somewhat undermining a lot of the conference review system is one very concrete example, but also other aspects of our lives as well. So not very positive from that point of view, but I am very concerned about that.
Great, Maria.
I I think one thing that, because the way that we interact with these models is with information produced by these models is increasing, and the context in which we interact with information produced by these models are also increasing a lot. One of the challenges that we've studied is the risk of representational biases being embedded in these models. And so, for example, we've looked at what happens when we're generating content, for instance, describing personas or generating characters, and how is it that models describe different people. And there had been some research looking at what happens if I asked models to describe, for instance, a woman or to describe a man. But this was all embedding demographic information in the prompt. We were curious about what happens when you're not explicitly noting any of these points, but if I ask a model to tell me a story about someone, then this someone is going to have a gender, and then how is this gender going to be correlated with other elements of how this person is going to look like? And what we found is that there's a lot of representational biases still in these models. We actually found these. We were looking at, for instance, if we're telling the model to generate biographies of different occupations, we find that the likelihood that it generates women, especially in male-dominated occupations, has increased a lot. And so we have some surface level representational biases improving, but then how people are described still encodes so many stereotypes. And so the way that because we're interacting with this information in many different contexts, and these models are being used to generate content for a lot of different contexts, how constantly interacting with these shapes our views about the world is something that is very important. And I will say, I don't think is only negative. So I just talked about one particular risk, that is the risk of representational biases and stereotypes being perpetuated and amplified, right? If I just tell you, hey, describe a teacher, and it embeds all of these like gender stereotypes, and I wasn't even thinking about gender, there's all these problems with it, right? But there's also these opportunities. There's this notion of aspirational affordances that was recently introduced by Sina Fazlpour and Meika Magnani. And what they talk about is how they have all of the information and cultural context that we create shapes what we imagine to be possible for ourselves as well, right? So what is it that we imagine to be possible? What are things that we think we can aspire to? And so this notion of aspirational affordances relates to how models may change these. And it could obviously also be negative. Maybe it shrinks the possibilities of what I imagine to be possible for myself, or what I imagine to be possible for my country, if I'm in a violent country, in terms of what are the possible future realities that we can inhabit. But it could also be very positive if it actually increases my aspirational, like my capability to imagine different possible futures. And so I think that this idea of these models and the information that they create shaping what we're able to imagine and what we're able to aspire to is one that I find really interesting as well, and that has also a lot of positive potential embedded in it.
Yeah, as a follow-on, you make me think of, I know you've done some great work thinking about people as well, information about people or information targeting at people. So when we think about stereotype and bias, so we could have inaccurate information that's spread that's about a particular group of people, or that information that's spread that's particularly trying to influence, like say, a particular group of people. When we think about this in the context of generative AI, do you see these new advances in AI again, either giving us greater power or the adversaries greater power to have that sort of deceptive information about people or targeting particular groups? Or is this something that's going to help those who are trying to protect the information and better protect those groups?
I think it definitely adds a lot of challenges, right? Because um, there are many different ways in which this information can be, as Greg was saying, for example, there can be misinformation that is introduced by the model itself, right? And so in a conversation that someone's having in an individual chat, and this interactive nature, right? The fact that I can say, well, but this sounds really implausible. And the model's like, no, 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 look, it is. So this capability to interact, I think, adds a lot of challenges, right? And I think that there's one of the big tensions there, and Matt, you mentioned the point of which is the stakeholder that we're talking about, right? Are we talking about the stakeholder that is being talked about, or are we being talking about the stakeholder that is being talked to, right? And I think that in this context of who are we talking to, I think one of the biggest tensions that I see emerging is I've seen a lot of move towards personalization of models and how that could be a potential for example, mitigating the problem that Jesse was mentioning of we're now all writing the exact same way, and that's a problem because we're losing this heterogeneity. But I think that that introduces the challenge of are we going to end up on a new version of information bubbles? Where we're interacting with these models and they're each telling us what we want to hear. So it's this version of, I always forget how to say this word. Greg, you mentioned it, being sycophantic, okay. Yeah.
I saw Greg
Um,
nodding a lot when you're talking about personalization, so I think he's going to probably want to jump in here with a
yeah,
few
yeah.
comments.
And so I think that that, for instance, that's a huge challenge, right? That is like, how do we get to not having these terrible like homogeneity and this algorithmic monoculture, but doing it in a way that doesn't lead us to these bubbles. And I'm gonna let Greg chime in because I'm curious what he wants to say about this.
Yeah, actually, I had a point I wanted to kind of follow on earlier. So, like, Maria, I teach the bias and bios paper of yours in my class, and so, the conversation I think regarding these kind of representational biases often turns to, well, can't you just sort of fix the data, right? Or couldn't we train a model not to have this? And I mean, I think that the place I normally come down on this is like that's really kind of fundamentally impossible. Like these models are trained from this like massive collection of data that's out there on the web. And like, if you look at the kind of press releases and the tech reports about how these models are trained, it's the trillions of tokens is really what powers it, right? There's no kind of setting aside the question of whether it would be well defined to kind of write down a sort of unbiased like set of documents or something like that. The simple fact is we need all of the data that's out there in order to make these models work well, and that data contains biases. So they're kind of baked into the model from day one. And so there's just this uphill battle of like, how do you make sure that those biases are kind of surfaced as little as possible? And that's what this alignment phase that Jesse was talking about is. Um, and yeah, I think that there's a lot of like, I think that there's still a lot of kind of bright-eyed views in Silicon Valley that like, okay, well, maybe in spite of those biases or whatever, we can ultimately get to some source of like truth. Like I think, Elon Musk talks about that a lot with like the Grok models, which have been deployed for kind of fact checking on X. And I mean, I think if you look at some of the things that have happened around those, like, they found sort of things in the system prompt saying like definitely don't talk about these issues. It's clear that like we don't all necessarily have the same source of truth. Yet at the same time, like there are a lot of like day-to-day interactions where someone fact checks something with Grok and it kind of returns a pretty reasonable answer. So like very much this kind of, double-edged sword thing. that kind of, I guess the last thing I'll comment on here is just this point about personalization. I mean, I think what's very unclear is like, what does it mean for something to be personalized and what is the desiderata there? Like I think I think it seems fairly clear based on some of these anecdotes about like, the sycophancy stuff that like, just a language model that always agrees with you is might feel good, but like I think with a sort of sober mind, that wouldn't be what most of us want, right? Like we do want to know the facts, or like if we ask a question, we want to be told, oh, that's the wrong question, you should be asking this, or at least that's my view. So then, like, what does that kind of personalization look like? I feel like that's still very much an ongoing question, and I don't have a good answer. So I don't know if that was the great follow-up that you were hoping for there, but that's what I'm gonna say.
Um, yeah, you guys are reminding me of, I recently read Mike Connolly has a new Lincoln Lawyer book where we sort of see some of the risks of harms of sycophancy, in these models and personalization when they really get more and more tailored and people go deeper and deeper into that sort of bubble with the model, the way they really can lead to some potential harms. Um, so this is a great time to open up the floor, I think, to audience questions. So based on what I'm sort of seeing so far, a couple different questions. Let me try to put this together. So there's a several different vectors we could be working in trying to sort of improve sort of the role of these language modeling technologies in response to, say, dealing with issues. Jesse mentions the human side more generally, or maybe we should really just be thinking about governance. On the technical side, there's of course tons of work trying to make these models more accurate, whether it's through things like RAG, retrieval augmented generation, or ensembling, or self-reflection kinds of things. There's lots of work on trying to make them more transparent and explainable. So, maybe they don't have to be better if we better understand what their boundaries are. There's a question here about using human in the loop, to try to intervene. And Maria talks a lot about sort of fairness and bias. Maybe we should be working on trying to really look at the training data and stuff that's going into these, or something about the process there. So if we really want to sort of improve, our trajectory for the information environment, where should we be investing? Should we be thinking mostly about improving accuracy, improving fairness, improving transparency, improving governance, having, better human in the loop architectures? I don't think I expect you all to have the perfect answer today, but any thoughts around kind of where we might be investing?
I guess I can start with probably not an answer to this very big question, but I do think there are some things we can potentially do better. And I think that aspect is kind of I think we should probably try to steer the models to better and more accurately express themselves. And kind of I think now a lot of the problems that we have seen is, for example, I think one of the audience questions mentioned RAG, but like what we have seen in the data is kind of the RAG itself isn't necessarily the issue. The solution. And the reason is kind of sometimes the stakeholders, i.e. the users, ask kind of a query, but then it kind of has a mismatch between the kind of evidence base that you can draw conclusions on. So this relates to what Greg and Maria were talking about around sycophancy. So what should the model behavior be in those cases? And I guess the second point is we have also seen a mismatch between kind of how the models introspect versus how they behave outwardly. An example we have studied is through summarization, where kind of we try to see what content models deem are important, meaning that they will be included in the summary, versus like when you actually ask the model, is that important? And we found a huge disagreement between both of these, and they're very consistent with each other as well. So I feel like we are at the stage where kind of the models output something, but then we have this trust issue of can we really kind of, is this really what's going on inside the model? Is this how the model can introspect? Can the model be more calibrated? When they express things like uncertainty, I think, Matt, you have led us a lot of work on this as well. So I think this is a great kind of way to at least do a little bit of make a little bit progress to kind of make all of this a little bit better.
Yeah, this was a big one. Greg, Jesse, any thoughts? Where do you think we should be, putting our eggs, investing our apples to try to do a little better?
I guess I'm going to give a kind of non-answer, which is like, I think that one of the benefits of like, thousands and tens of thousands of researchers piling into the field means that actually we could explore all of these things. And I mean, I think it is something where it's such this fast developing technology, and like the changes are in some ways so rapid that I do think we need this kind of like all hands on deck. Like we should have people looking at policy solutions and governance, and sort of internal governance at companies and sort of external governance like regulations and things like that. Yeah, I kind of don't think we should rule any of this out. I think at the same time, there needs to be the technical tools that maybe can enable some of this stuff to happen, like an understanding of like what models are doing, or better understanding of like what model scales, or how we understand where models become capable enough to do certain things. And there's been all this discussion in the regulation around the flops, or the floating point operations used to train a model, which I think everyone agrees is kind of a bad measure for how good a model is, but yet it sort of correlates with it in some way. So yeah, I mean, I think we need better understanding of all of this. I don't think there's I don't claim to have the answer. So
And I'll just finish by picking up on one of the keywords that were in the question. That was this element of the human in the loop. And often when I write papers on human in the loop, reviewers are like, well, but what, like, why human in the loop means this? Why do you talk about this? And obviously, human in the loop means very different things, because it's like where in the loop, right? So there's many ways in which humans are included in the loop during the training phase, but often we also talk about human in the loop in the decision point, right? That's how, in the context of decision support systems and machine learning for decision support, we've often talked about humans in the loop as the algorithm gives a recommendation and then a human makes a decision. So it's kind of in contrast to automation. And I think one of the things that has drastically changed with these models is that this notion, for those of us that have been working on decision support systems, for instance, we no longer have a clear decision point. We no longer have a clear outcome or treatment or label that we're concerned with, but rather we're interacting as humans in the loop. Like the way that this loop looks is much more interactive, right? And so that really opens a lot of questions of things that we need to better understand, and the questions of that we've typically thought about in the context of humans in the loop in decision support, of over-reliance, under-reliance. How do you foster what we term appropriate reliance, right? So not just doing what the algorithm says becomes so challenging in this context. And I think we've all seen it in the context of education, for instance, where we don't, the outcome is not we need one more essay on this topic that we've written billions of essays in, but rather we want to develop the critical thinking that comes in the process of writing that essay, right? And how do we use these tools to enable that other goal that is the true goal versus the output? I think creates a lot of questions for what it means to have good kind of human in the loop dynamics.
Maria, as the ambassador for all of Europe, I wonder if we could try to get one quick audience question to you quickly. People are trying to think a little bit about policies we have for sort of information environment, what works well. And as you look at, the EU, say, versus the United States, we often think the EU is a little more progressive in policy. Any quick comments at all about kind of what you see in terms of the way EU is thinking about information environment, information integrity, relative to the United States?
Yeah, I think that is uh there's a lot of value, and I think that in the US you've seen that in a couple of states as well. I think that one of the things that I've always found very contradictory in this question of regulating is that I've often seen an argument that it was particularly strong in the US, an argument against regulation that was, well, we don't understand the technology well. We don't know what is the correct way of regulating it, so we shouldn't regulate it yet. And I think that that was a very, very common argument that I've heard in the, especially in the US context. And one of the things that is very weird about it is that why is the consequence of we don't understand the technology, we shouldn't regulate it, as opposed to, well, maybe we should understand it better before we deploy it in healthcare, for instance, right? There's all of these consequential and very impactful consequences that these technologies can have, where I think that in general, and this is just my perception, I think that we need to better understand this before we let it be deployed, rather, is the mindset in Europe. I think that in the context of self-driving cars, for example, you can see that where the way that things evolve when considering deploying self-driving or semi-self-driving cars in Germany looks very different to the US. And I think that I would say is kind of the difference in mentality. That is, how is it that we should act when we haven't yet understood something? And I think that there's a lot of value, obviously, for the purpose of innovation and entrepreneurship and creating spaces for new things. That means, well, we need to create spaces to see what happens, to understand this better. But I think that we need to understand when is it that we're disrupting really high stake domains, and what is the approach that we should have in that regard. So I would say that is the biggest. This is maybe a little bit of a non-answer, but I think that I would say is the biggest contrast that I perceive when interacting with policymakers across different countries.
Thanks, and thank you all. So we're going to have to wrap up fairly quickly with closing comments. I'll start with Jesse in just a second, but maybe we can say 30 seconds from each of you, just to say what do you think about sort of the most important things now, in 2025 we should keep our eyes on, looking forward for sort of advances or developments. Maybe Jesse, and then we'll hear from Greg and Maria.
Yeah, well, I guess personally, for me, I would be excited about a lot of the topics that we discussed earlier, things around personalization, and kind of around this more user-centric view, and thinking about how kind of AI can be a bridge between kind of the humanity and social science side versus the computer science side, and have a more of this like kind of perspectives from both sides.
Wonderful. Greg.
Yeah, I think I mean, in terms of where the sort of orientation of the research and, some of the to-dos are, I think we've already kind of talked about those. I guess the call I would give here is just like, I think it falls on all of us, and I would encourage everyone listening to just like kind of try to be a responsible citizen with respect to information integrity in your own life. Like, if you use language models, like try to think critically about what they're saying. Don't write to the NSA that you've developed a new theory if that seems really kind of implausible to you. I think there's actually a lot of very smart people that have been kind of taken in or had their thinking sort of transformed in some ways. So like, I don't think I'm immune to it in any ways. And I think that, it's on all of us to kind of lead by example. Like, hopefully like the generation of kids growing up with LLMs who are like using them all over school or whatever, like, if at least like people who have the critical thinking skills can set a good example and, not fall into some of these traps, we can make things better for the future.
I wasn't sure if I could moderate a panel, but GPT said I could. So here we are. Hopefully it's gone okay. Maria.
I think one of the big questions, and it may relate a little bit to what was mentioned before, is to what extent these general purpose models are going to be what like becomes predominant. And I think that this is also largely a business question in terms of there's a big question that companies are grappling with, that is, how do they monetize this technology? And I think that that will impact a lot how is it that our interaction with these models evolve. And so I think that that is probably one of the elements that I'm curious to see how things grow in that space. As we see things in healthcare, for example, we're seeing a lot of specialized models, but I think that the uses, the way that we interact with them will likely evolve a lot in that direction, in that dimension. And so that's kind of a question mark that I have, and one thing that I think will lead to either in some cases mitigating some of the risks or creating or exacerbating some.
Well, thank you so much for all of our panelists for being with us today. And I want to invite our audience to come back in 2 minutes for our next panel on responsible AI and privacy. Good to see you all. Take care, everyone.
Well, we have about 50 minutes to talk about a subject that is fascinating to a lot of people. I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this panel discussion. I'm Sharon Strover. I'm at the University of Texas, and I've been directing a project called Being Watched, which has especially focused on artificial intelligence and some of the social and policy dimensions of values that are important to our societies. This grew out of a recognition that artificial intelligence is getting better and better with data in terms of aggregation capabilities, in terms of analyzing, obviously, and in terms of improving decision processes, but also in that process, sometimes trampling, sometimes negotiating, and making a problem out of expectations that all of us might have for things like values and for social norms. So this backs into the matter of where we can intervene, and that is really the focus of a lot of our project work, and that includes intervening on matters of privacy, as well as accountability and transparency to both users and to the people who produce the data that AI collects and analyzes. And it backs into matters of fairness and bias. It puts a lot of people on puts a lot of pressure on people and on institutions, especially public institutions that are accountable to the public. And that too accesses matters of law and policy, and it accesses matters of design and technology and how we think about crafting the capabilities of these technologies. So we're extremely fortunate in having with us three panelists. We have Dr. Gwen Schaffer, who's a professor in the Department of Journalism and Public Relations and director of research for the College of Liberal Arts at Cal State Long Beach. Her telecommunications policy research looks at complex aspects of social inclusion in the information age. And she's going to share with us some of her current research on the data privacy implications of smart cities. She also, before she went to graduate school, worked as a reporter for a dozen years, which I think gives her some unique access to the concerns of both policymakers and the public. We also have Dr. Atlas Wang, who's a tenured associate professor here, who holds the Temple Foundation Fellowship in the Chandra Family Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. He's a faculty member of in UT's Computer Science Department as well, and at the Odin Institute. He's recently been on leave doing some fascinating work with XTX Markets in New York City, which is really allowing him to dive into algorithmic trading and deep learning. Atlas has received many, many research awards, including the NSF Career Award and just a roster of awards that are too numerous to mention. And then we're so fortunate to have Emily Tucker with us, who is the executive director of Georgetown Law University Center for Privacy. She has worked on numerous projects and directed a variety of endeavors coping with the onset of technological capabilities and privacy. And she's most recently a co-author on a major international report looking at artificial intelligence and information dimensions that touch on numerous aspects of information. So I thought I would give the panelists an opportunity to summarize your work briefly, if you like, and then I have a lot of questions for you, and I'll be looking at the chat as well for questions from the audience members. So we didn't work out in advance who would start, but maybe I could start with you, Gwen. You're the first, you're to the left on my screen.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me to be on the panel. I appreciate it. So, as you mentioned, my research looks at the data privacy implications of smart city technologies, or like surveillance technologies that local governments deploy and maintain. And my current project is we're lucky that we have a National Science Foundation award to support this research, and it's a 3-year project that I'm working on in collaboration with a couple of staffers with the City of Long Beach, as well as a privacy engineer at Carnegie Mellon University. And our project is really an attempt to give residents agency over data that is collected by civic technologies. So think about things like automated license plate readers, public Wi-Fi hotspots. Here in Long Beach, every single home has a smart water meter in it. And, of course, there are, hundreds of these technologies that we engage with every day. And we are developing a mobile privacy assistant that makes it easy for residents to exercise their privacy rights that are actually granted to them under the California Consumer Privacy Act. So we all have basic rights under state law, the right to request that our data be deleted, the right to request that no data be collected on us by a particular technology in the future. But very few people actually exercise those rights. If you're checking out a shared bike, you just want to hop on the bike. You're not necessarily then writing social bikes and telling them don't collect data on me when I use this technology in the future. So we are working on this mobile app, and I have some visuals, but I don't know how much time you want me to spend. So I'll follow your lead, Sharon.
If you want to share a few slides.
Okay, sure. Okay, so I'll just briefly tell you about where we got to the point where we are now, because our research is pretty iterative. Initially, we had a planning grant from NSF's Smart and Connected Communities program, and for that project, we designed these data privacy labels that we posted on dozens of city technologies. So here's just an example. So we used icons and text to let users know what the technology is and what data is being collected by that technology. And then every sign has a unique QR code. And when residents scan the QR code, they go to what we call the digital rights platform, where we have inventoried over 30 city technologies so far, where we have a 7-layer data chain where residents can find out more about how that particular technology is using their data. So whether it's shared, how long it's stored, whether it's encrypted, all that kind of thing. So here's just some screenshots of the digital rights platform. And then here's some images of our signs in the wild that we have posted around Long Beach right now. I think I have a couple more pictures of these are like professionally taken, and then I have a few photos that I took that aren't as good. But you can see people interacting with the signs. So after we did the user testing on the signs last year, we realized, many people said, I love having the transparency about how my data is being collected and used, but I really want an opt out. And where is my opt out? So that's why we applied for a second National Science Foundation Award, and happily we got it. And now we're working on the mobile app with CMU and the city.
Great. Okay. Thank you. I think that the matter of data is a good transition to talk to you, Alice, about some of your work. And when you and I have spoke recently, you used the intriguing term unlearning. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the thrust of your research and how it has moved or even changed over the last couple of years.
I work on machine learning and optimization algorithms. So I mostly attack the problem of privacy as a technical people's point of view. So I initially look into the privacy problem because I'm interested in cameras and video surveillance. That means the algorithms supporting that. And that's actually what brought me together with Sharon to develop this Being Watched project. The problem I was interested in that time was, okay, so we know the public surveillance cameras are everywhere. We took videos, but many people, when they are being took videos, they are not even conscious of being taken videos. So the videos were there, people, so who can view that? And if someone later realized that you were taken into the video by mistake, you want to be removed by the video, or there are certain attributes of you, certain events of you, you don't want other people to see it in certain occasions. How do you have the right to remove yourself and edit yourself in the collected video data? So I'm most the video transformation problem using machine learning method. How to transform a video that potentially containing privacy sensitive information about you into a version you are more comfortable for others view. And let me give you an example. So let's say you have a Amazon Alexa camera, maybe older version with camera, and put in the bedroom. You may want this to look at you. For example, you want to recognize your gesture, recognize your expression, so you can have more animated control of the device, just bring you a bit more life convenience. But you probably do not want, for example, the camera to look at you and capture you are changing clothes or doing other intimate event at your own bedroom. Sometimes maybe you have forgotten to turn off the camera. Sometimes maybe you just don't pay enough attention on that. But let's assume some videos that you accidentally don't want other people to look at was accidentally being captured. And could you ask this video to be removed? Could you ask those video to be edited? For example, certain part of a video you don't believe should be kept in the record. Can I just remove those parts from the video data and retain other useful parts to cater to your daily needs better? In other words, how to make the data still be useful while the privacy sensitive information can be removed? That was my research question. So with that goal, we have developed a data set. We have developed some machine learning algorithm using a technique called adversary learning. We wrote papers and we collaborated with Sharon's team to even collect some small scale data on the UT Austin campus about the people's public event, their behaviors, and then ask people to annotate what behavior they actually do not want to be kept as a copy in the video surveillance. So we developed both technical and social study on that aspect. We have been working on this mostly in the first 2 and 3 years of this project. Then I have expanded my interest into another related topic. Before, I would say, before when people say their data being abused, they are mostly concerned the data being abused by Okay, so other people accidentally view the data. There's a data leakage, or there are cloud service providers viewing the data. They're being abused or misused or by human. We all know what happened, right? This world is taken over by generative AI, and they're consuming all the possible data they can find in the internet by every means, collected by whatever method, as long as they can use it legally allowed or even maybe not, they will use it to train their latest model. So we discover more and more cases that sometimes people's data, including their visual data, photos and videos, and the text data, I mean personal notes and others, maybe they just didn't pay enough attention and share it publicly, or maybe there's some other leaks, and causing many of those private sensitive information to be publicly leaked, then used to train public generative AI models. It does not look as harmful as like being, well, like say a naked photo of you being directly viewed by people, because I feel like those model data are eaten by the model, and the model probably doesn't feel as harmful as a person, right? However, when you study closer the model, we find actually the risk here may be underestimated. There are advanced machine learning to recover or generate the original raw data about you that may be sensitive, that may be privacy related, and that create another fault of risk that getting bigger and bigger given generative AI models also become stronger and more prevalently used every day. So my interest has then expanded to this new domain, which I often joked with Sharon. This is called a being watched number version 2, being watched digitally, because your data is now being used by a model, not by the human, but the model is actually watching you and taking record of you. Under this theme, we have developed an algorithm to first detect whether you have sensitive data being memorized by text or image generation models, LLMs or VLMs. And then we are now studying algorithm to remove this potential sensitive data if you believe your data has been built in. Because now those generative AI models takes trillions of dollars to train, we cannot say, hey, my data is there. I don't like your model. Could you take away my data and train a new model? This is economically unlikely to happen, but we are creating other more economically plausible ways to make the model producers take immediate action to people's request. This is still a new premature research area, but we believe that will be an essential equipment in future privacy controllable deployment of generative AI. And that's my ongoing work.
I think this is a fascinating development that many people will be extremely interested in. It does seem as if my connection is a little bit shaky, by the way, but we'll push on. So, Emily, what is the center up to, and what is your perspective on where AI poses some both opportunities and risks for privacy and privacy rights?
Sure. So, well, first of all, thank you for having me, Sharon, and thanks to the Good Systems folks for including me in this awesome event. So just a little bit of context about the Privacy Center. So we are sort of like a think tank situated at a law center, but we operate pretty independently. We have pretty complete academic freedom at Georgetown. And our goal is to investigate and oppose government and corporate surveillance. And our research focuses in particular on the impact of such surveillance on those who have been historically marginalized, exploited, or policed. So that's communities of color, immigrants, workers, religious minorities, poor folks. And we do long-term, deep investigations, empirical investigations to try to quantify and explain the impact of surveillance on those communities. So I'm not going to be able to go through everything that we've done in the last 11 years of our existence, but I wanted to share a few recurring themes that I think are relevant to the themes of the conference. So the least surprising of the themes is that surveillance impacts those historically targeted communities in a quite significant way, and in a way that is measurably greater than the impacts on those who do not belong to a targeted group. That will not surprise anyone, although sometimes the details of those impacts are quite surprising. A second theme, perhaps more surprising across all of our work, is that the surveillance of those targeted communities is used quite explicitly to justify and operationalize mass surveillance of everyone. A third theme is that surveillance begets surveillance. So there's a few ways that this happens. One is just when you have a new form of surveillance hardware, you acquire a new data set, and that data set gives someone the idea to develop an algorithmic analytics tool to analyze that data, which then creates the incentive to develop uh, to increase the amount of data that you have and find new sets of data that can be integrated. And then that also creates the incentive for more surveillance hardware. And so the loop continues. And then and then another piece of that third theme is that surveillance capabilities over time tend to take agencies or institutions that are supposed to have a service orientation and turn them slowly into entities that have a policing orientation. And then the fourth theme is that, and that I think that we are really seeing this in a visceral way. I used to have to kind of make an argument to sort of a future pointing argument to help people understand how this might happen. I think we're seeing it play out in quite visceral way right now in American politics. And that fourth theme is that as surveillance capabilities expand, the legal categories around who can use what surveillance against who for what purpose start to collapse. And so I want to share a few slides that are sort of taken from all of the different research projects we've done at the center over the last 10 years that I think illustrate some of these themes. So I'm going to attempt to screen share now. Okay, so how do I? This first slide is from our 2016 investigation of how police were using facial recognition technology. So this is quite old. It's 9 years old at this point. It was our first major report, and we surveyed every police departments in every state. We had hundreds of thousands of FOIA records, and I encourage you to read the report. It's called The Perpetual Lineup. But the biggest sort of headline out of that report was that 1 in 2 adults is in a police face recognition database. That was 9 years ago. The industry has expanded, the infrastructure has expanded, the databases have grown, and I feel, quite confident making an educated and conservative guess that today that proportion is probably well over 3/4. Another example is from our 2022 report, where we tried to understand the way that ICE's data practices were expanding surveillance kind of nationwide. And so we did a ton of research for this, and this is really just the tip of the iceberg. So we focused on driver data, utilities data, and automated license plate reader data. Those were like the 3 data sets we focused on most closely. Please check out the reports at americandragnet.org. But these stats on the screen are just a few of the kind of striking headlines that came out of that research. Obviously, our main concern in this report was to help people understand the impact on immigrant communities of this surveillance dragnet. And yet there was this inescapable conclusion that yes, this is a surveillance dragnet that is for the purposes of immigration enforcement, but actually the majority of people who are in this database are not people who have who are people who are citizens or who are permanent residents. And we speculated at the time that this was a very abusable state of affairs, and we're now seeing that play out on the ground in visceral ways. I should also note that I'm sure that this report is only 3 years old, but I'm sure that these proportions have also increased radically. I mean, we know that the surveillance spending, that last bullet, we know that spending has exploded even further in the last couple of years. And then I finally wanted to draw your attention to our most recent set of investigations, which is around the collection of genetic data. So in 2024, we investigated DHS's new DNA collection program. DHS had a very small DNA collection program for the previous 15 years. And in 2020, there was a rule change that was put forth at the end of the Trump administration, making DNA collection mandatory. So this is DHS going around taking DNA from anybody, basically anyone that it wants to. If to have your DNA taken by a a police officer who's doing criminal legal law enforcement in the US, there has to be some kind of Fourth Amendment process. You have to be arrested. That has to be supported by probable cause. There's some kind of judicial review of that arrest that has to justify the taking of the DNA. That doesn't happen with DHS because supposedly they're not doing when are using immigration powers, they're not doing criminal law enforcement. So they're just going around taking DNA from everybody, essentially everyone they detain, even very briefly. And so we found that the number of DNA samples in CODIS, which is a federal law enforcement database that's used for policing, for criminal policing, that grew by more than 5,000% in 4 years, and we know it has grown even further. We have an update from this year on our website, which you can check out. But in that report, we sort of we speculated, and we were hesitant to speculate in this way because we were worried it would be perceived as sensational that DHS would start taking DNA from U.S. citizens, even though in their own internal policy they claim that they do not have the authority to do this unless it's part of a criminal investigation. This summer, we found proof in Customs and Border Patrol records that they were already doing that in 2024 on purpose when we released our initial report, and you can see the details of that on our website as well. And so what do I hope folks will take away from this? The first thing is all data is now police data, not just the data that I've talked about in those 3 reports, which are really just a sampling of our research and the research that has been done in this arena, but commercial data, social media data, all of the data that is created about us in the course of going about our lives. Almost all of that data can be accessed by police one way or another, and the rights protection framework is extremely weak. Second thing is not all policing is done by police. Goes to the third theme that I mentioned. So increasingly, surveillance infrastructure is just bleeding into every institution. And so all of these actors, some government actors, some are, our employers, actors that are part of the larger social sector, are being brought into these surveillance policing operations. And then finally, the target is everyone. And I just wanted to make, and this goes to that fourth theme about the breakdown of legal categories. So we did this report in 2016 on police misuse of facial recognition, hoping things would improve. And just this past month, we discovered that ICE has its own bespoke facial recognition app that it takes into the field. And ICE has been told this app is the authority, not the birth certificate, not any other documentation, not a judge. This app is the authority on whether or not you are someone who can be targeted for detention and deportation by immigration police. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. There's I think an interesting and to a certain extent alarming confluence in a lot of the work across what each of you has done. And that has to do with some of the limitations of the individual to command his or her data, to control data. And it does kind of back into broader matters of where we can intervene. And our project has looked at what are often called policies and also laws and ordinances on local levels. There's a difference. A policy lacks enforcement. It's a statement of intent, whereas a law and ordinance is indeed, supposedly enforceable and something that that one can take to litigation. Where should we be moving, or are there good models at the federal or state or even local levels that can begin to grapple with individual rights with respect to privacy and these data gathering apparatuses? Gwen, I think you've looked into this a little bit, and I was really struck by one of the fleeting statements on your slideshow about individual reactions to opting out and what single individual capabilities are with respect to data.
Yeah, I guess the disadvantage of going first is I really glossed over a lot of the detail and the implications of our project because I was trying to keep it brief.
Mhm.
Before I forget, there were a couple of things that Emily mentioned that I just want to reinforce because she talked about some of the implications on a broad scale. And the research that my team has done over the past few years really illustrates and like humanizes some of the things that Emily talked about. Um, so, for example, she mentioned about the ICE data, and Long Beach has a fairly significant non-native population. And I want to say it was like in 2022, the city of Long Beach inadvertently shared license plate information with ICE. And when we did focus group interviews, and one of my methodologies is data walks, and when we did those last year, without even a prompt bringing it up, in almost every single focus group, residents mentioned the fact that they didn't trust the city because of this, inadvertent sharing of license plate data with ICE, even though we're a sanctuary city as well. That was the other, sort of issue that kind of compounded the distrust. So, Sharon, you had asked, what are some of the things the government should be doing? I mean, I think the most obvious thing that we could do is have a federal law that limits or even bans government entities and corporations from collecting all of this data on users. But I don't think that's likely to happen. And there are about 20 states that have state, data privacy laws. And so there's, the regulation is pretty patchy, and not every American has those protections. But I mean, I would think all of those laws, what they do is they grant rights to residents. And rights are fairly meaningless when it's so difficult to exercise those rights. And, just like I had mentioned earlier with the California Consumer Privacy Act, legally, anyone in the state can request that the data that's been collected on them be deleted. They have access to all of the data that's been collected on them in the past. They can request that these technology developers no longer collect data on them in the future, but very few people actually take those steps. And then there's that broader issue that we encounter now, where so many of the technologies with which we interact in the public sphere are screenless. So there's all this kind of data being collected on us in our ambient environment and without our knowledge. And so, how do you, even if you wanted to opt out of that kind of data collection, it's almost impossible to do. And I'll stop talking in a minute, but one other thing that I am exploring in my research now is like the asymmetrical nature of the technologies because they're screenless and there's all this passive data collection going on. The owners of the technologies have all the power, and the people from whom the data are being collected are, I don't want to say powerless, but are minimally able to do anything about the exploitation and the extraction of the data about them.
I think that really doubles down on some of Emily's points about the various sites that are gathering data that feed into broader institutions that figure out new ways to use that data, often too often in ways that nobody really anticipates. This interest in and slippage between what an individual can do, what an individual knows, and the realm of assembling data sets and moving those data to models goes back to what Atlas has been working on, I think. And you and I talked earlier about data governance and about the idea of how one should know or could know if one's data is in a training data set. And the difference between getting data out of a database as opposed to getting it out of a model. Could you elaborate a little bit on what possibility space is there?
Sure. I think this area is now generally referred as unlearning in contrast to machine learning. That's an interestingly coined word, but widely accepted. This problem itself is a pretty challenging, if not ambiguously defined one, because the whole machine learning process is about abstract patterns from data. So we get a bunch of data, those are like raw input, and we need to cook those data into something finer and more useful. This is a distilling process itself, and inevitably we'll be losing information and recomposing information, and no one say it should be a invertible process. Therefore, if you want to undo this machine learning process, like from the very distilled model, you want to get back to the data level and pull something out. Uh, I don't even think this is anything we have anything close to that in theory. So it's a very challenging problem. That said, people has been explored ad hoc ways to approach this goal. One simplest idea would be because most machine learning models nowadays are computed by a standard optimization algorithm called a gradient descent. In in general, you could consider where compute an influence of each data to the model and add all those influence together. And people can, after the model has trained, you can also still estimate the influence of this data point to the model. And instead of add to the model because you supposedly already add that to the model during the training process, you instead of adding, you subtracting this influence from the model. The influence could be represented as simple as a gradient or to more complicated ways, such as statistical tools like we call Shapley value or influence function or other things. This is an intuitive idea, however, cannot completely undo the whole process because it's like I would like to use a metaphor to explain this. The whole machine learning model is like a lake. If you and the data, you can consider this as a drop of ink. If you throw the drop of ink to the lake, yes, you in the next second you regret. You want to pour this water out and try to minimize the effect of the ink. Yes, it look like it has been minimized, but no one would guarantee there is no molecular or other small particles in the ink that's already left in the lake. Actually, there must be. This is a difficult. This is similar to the difficulty of unlearn. Once the data is in, it is in, and it's very hard to say we can 100% get it out. So you can undo the influence or use ad hoc ways, but in the current neural network, which is trained as a big whole trunk of parameters, there's no apparent way we can provably, rigorously, or even trustedly pull the information out. So in our recent research explorations, I am personally starting to more and more feel we should solve the problem not just by rethinking, thinking how to do data, how to do privacy level better, and treat machine learning as a fixture. We should also, maybe we also want to reverse our thinking and try to redesign the machine learning models to be more data privacy friendly and make them more organic for data to be pulled out even after being putting in. And I think that is a more promising avenue for researcher from our machine learning optimization technical perspective. I'll give you one example about our thoughts. For example, I think many people here may have heard about the AI agent. The AI agent is using pre-trained language model and let them, well, machine learning model, and let them involve in the user environment to continue learn what the user like, what's the preference, what's the history of interaction, and continue improving performance. Usually, in most AI agent models, you do not continue fine-tune the language model or the AI model that has been a central controller because they have been trained by millions of people's data and you are just talking them 10 sentences a day. It's really just an ink drop compared to an ocean. So really, we don't usually continue train the models. Instead, we would make people, what is more commonly done here is to use an external database and store those information in the database. So the language model could interact with this database. We usually call this memory in an AI agent system. And that will create an interesting paradigm shift to data privacy and unlearning because now the data is not thrown into the lake of model It's not even entering the model. Instead, it is stored in somewhere else. Consider that you put a bottle and you drop this you drop this ink into the bottle and then put this bottle in the lake. Now, if you want to remove this ink, you just pour this bottle out and unless you are using a leaking bottle, then I'm 100% sure you have probably removed the data from the model pipeline itself, right? So I think that is really promising by using a separate external memory mechanism instead of using data, putting every data into the model through a learning process. The latter could be really challenging to undo, but the former you get way more flexibility to pull things out. In deep learning, we call this trend modularization. Build modular pipelines instead of monolithic pipelines. And I think that is one way good to go. There are many other technical trends, but I think from redesigning machine learning, we will get more flexibility and more theoretical rigor about how this unlearning process could be done. And that's really exciting.
I entirely agree. And I love both the analogy to data in a bottle as opposed to data as a drop of water dissolving into a lake, as opposed to something extractable and more controllable. This seems to be related as well to how we think about this thing we're calling privacy in the face of waves and waves of data that is so banal, that is so widespread, that appears in so many different fora, that it does call into question how we could actually implement something like this at the machine learning level. And as well, it does seem to me that there has to be some connection to the institutions that are gathering the data and that are institutionalizing and creating the data sets to begin with. Emily, you and I were talking a little bit about the need to perhaps even conceptualize privacy differently from what conventional law, not that it's that conventional law's conception of privacy is entirely in agreement at this point. But I was wondering if you said that you were interested in how a collective view of privacy might operate or how we might respond to that.
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts about this, which I won't be able to probably usefully condense here. But I think, what I'm about to say is not something that can be codified in statute. And in fact, to try to do that would kind of destroy it. So I just want to give that caveat. But I do think that to the extent that we have legal frameworks that address rights protection in the context of global mass surveillance, they are very, very weak. They are weak for a lot of reasons, and a lot of those reasons have to do with the wealth and political power of a handful of tech companies. But I think there is another equally important and like entirely unrecognized reason, which is that we are still stuck in thinking about privacy as an individual right. That's what's at the heart of the GDPR, which a lot of people still think of as kind of the best we have. And most of the other existing and proposed frameworks for data governance in political contexts that claim to be or aspire to be democratic, that's the approach that they take to rights protection. And of course, privacy should be treated as an individual right. But to understand it only as an individual right is very incomplete. We don't only need privacy as a way to control the boundaries of what is personal to us as individuals. We need privacy to be able to do anything meaningful with other people. And the ability to do meaningful things with other people is really the most fundamental requirement for democratic self-governance. It is the first thing that needs to exist in order for that dream to be realizable. And so, we have to be able to deliberate together. We have to be able to organize together. We have to be able to do those things in all kinds of contexts, including contexts that might not appear to us to be explicitly political. We have to be able to do that for the activities of citizenship to become possible and to become real. And we just can't do that in a context where we know everything we do is turned into data and comprehensively surveilled. So, privacy as an individual right makes some sense when privacy is generally available as a background condition in the given environment. That is not the case right now. And everyone knows it's not the case. Even if you don't know at a particular moment that you are being recorded or being watched, there is still sort of the pervasive sense that that privacy is something that you can only get through some form of privilege, that wealth, political access, specialized knowledge, your privacy is something that you kind of have to claw back for yourself within a particular context and very intentionally create for yourself and other people. So if that's the case, then you have to start thinking about it less as how do we protect our personal information and more as how do we protect our ability to relate to other people directly rather than relating them to them through a pervasive and indefinite surveiller, through our awareness of a pervasive and indefinite surveiller. And so figuring out how to do that is going to be an important part of any future possibility for democratic political community. And I really think like we need to get out of this AI governance delusion that all of the funders are putting millions of dollars into, that educational institutions are in a fever dream about. Like we need to start not talk, we need to not talk about algorithmic governance. We need to talk about de-datification. We need to talk about putting in place rules about what kinds of human activity can be converted into data in the first place. What kinds of entities can have and control that data, how much data any particular corporate or government entity can have, how many natural resources they can consume in processing that data, and then we need really, really strong limits in place for use cases. So, limiting the use of corporate data products in places like policing and other rights implicating contexts.
Thank you. I neglected to call people's attention to the Q&A function. I think many of you are familiar with it, but we have just about 5 minutes left, so there are a couple of questions available to us that we can talk about. But just one quick question from me with respect to de-datification. Do you see any link to the processes that you're talking about and the technical processes that Atlas is working on, that his team is exploring as protective mechanisms for data?
Sorry.
I was excitedly making notes about that. Go for it, Al. You go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just not sure because I don't know why my voice get cutting a bit. Is this another question for me or I got it wrong?
I was actually thinking Emily could
Oh,
reflect
sorry
on
about
it,
that.
but I think so often we have legal folks here, we have social scientists here, we have technologists here, and part of what good systems is doing is trying to bridge the discourse and the terms and understand the possibility spaces that each of us occupies. So I was wondering if Emily had a reaction to some of what Atlas is up to.
Yes, well, I also can't claim to completely understand it, and I'd love to catch up with you, Atlas, after this. But I think yes, I was immediately thinking, oh, this could be a piece of the de-datification framework. And the reason that I like de-datification as the framework is because it is so necessarily cross-disciplinary. There's a technical component of like how would we actually accomplish de-datification? There's a legal component of how would we incentivize and enforce it. There's also just like a philosophical component. What would it mean if we were encouraged, enabled, or demanded the right to not think of all of our human activities as things that can and will be rendered as data? So not to plug, but we are going to have a conference at the Privacy Center called the Conference on De-Datification in May that is going to invite interventions like the one Atlas is presenting, like the one Gwen has presented, and from other disciplines as well.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you for alerting us to it. I know we're short on time. We have two questions, and I was going to wrap up on what one of them is anyway. So very quickly, one question from an individual is, how can one counter the fear tactics used to justify the sharing of private data? And there's an ancillary comment on how weak the contract and consumer laws might be that allow us to or facilitate sharing data. Does anybody have a response to that? How we counter those fear tactics around sharing?
Do you mean like fear tactics, like you will not have access to a service or a product unless you provide this
I,
data, or more from a law enforcement
I
standpoint?
think the question mentions click wrap being allowed, which kind of, I think, is what you're thinking about. The automatic agreements to unknowingly give away rights.
I don't know if I have a direct response to that, but I did want to mention something about de-datification if nobody else is going to answer that question.
I think go ahead. We do have to
Okay, I
wrap
know we
up
only have a
pretty
second,
quickly.
but this is at a little bit of a different level. Obviously, Atlas and Emily were talking about sort of the technical ways of like a de-datification can be done that way. But doing the kind of research I do at like a very, very on the ground local level, I see the city consistently adopting new surveillance technologies as like the solution to everything. Safety for, you know, I don't know, maintaining empty lots. Like we just need more technology, more eyes, more recordings, more sensors, more object detection. And
More and more.
more and more. And like, I don't believe that those technologies, those surveillance technologies are actually making us safer. And I think another way to de-datify is to start creating public spaces where we have eyes doing the surveillance, creating public places where people will gather, like outdoor. Well, I know I live in Southern California, so it's much warmer, but, where we'll have opportunities for people to, be outside and commune and be together and have our eyes be the surveillance instead of all of this technology. And I know they're like public art and just things where we're not relying on the technology to make our cities and spaces safer, but actually, human contact and community serving that role.
That's a fairly optimistic note on which to end. I'll give Emily and Atlas just a quick final sentence or two on where we should look for the future of productive research to address these issues. Emily, you first, and then Atlas.
I think my de-datification was going to be my final
Yeah.
my final suggestion, that we're asked to treat the datafied world as progress, or even more problematically as kind of a natural fact, and it really isn't. Civilizations have risen and fallen. The chatbot will not live forever, and we have choices to make, and we can choose a future that is good, that is more advanced, that is innovative, that is progressive, without us, going along with the assumption that data is going to undergird everything. And we should start thinking about what we want that to look like.
Thank you. Alice?
Yeah, I think the AI and machine learning research has gone through a long period that prioritize utility. The governance, there are other metrics we must prioritize, privacy being into one, and maybe transparency, trustworthiness, and many other things. And those may not be all fixable by post-hoc processing, and some may benefit from thinking even more forward, even revamping part of the modeling pipeline itself, and I see more promise.
Terrific. These are really good points on which we can end. So let me thank the panelists and appreciate all of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I learned.
Okay.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. This panel is about responsible AI and user needs. So it's 11 a.m., so I'm gonna get us started. Yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation because each of our panelists today brings a very distinct perspective on what it means to design and deploy AI responsibility. So we have a representative from industry and also public sector, then academia. And as we all know, the conversation around responsible AI is often dominated by technical risk or abstract principles. And today we want to ground this conversation in practice. So who are the users we are actually designing for and what do they need? And how do we turn those needs into systems and processes that are not only innovative, but responsible? So we will begin with brief introduction of each panelist and then move on to discussion about opportunities and challenges. So with that, I will invite each of our panelists to introduce themselves and share a bit about their work. So I'll go with Andrew first.
Thanks, Min, and thanks for having me here. It's great to see everyone. So I'm Andrew Smart. I'm a research scientist at Google Research, and our team is broadly under this sort of responsible AI umbrella. And then my particular team is called Impact Lab, and we have a range of expertise in our team, from technical people to civil rights and human rights experts, user researchers. My own background is kind of weird, and I did cognitive neuroscience, and then I worked in aerospace, and then I worked in healthcare, and then I was at Twitter, and then for the last 8 years I've been at Google, always kind of in this socio-technical area of trying to understand how technical systems work in society, and this exactly like the panel you said, designing, who are we designing for? And I guess, yeah, Google, the challenge, of course, is they want everyone in the whole world to use this technology. And so, but yeah, I guess as we'll discuss, it's definitely challenging to balance this personal, this new thing of personalization, with a kind of view toward designing for everyone. So yeah, I don't know, I can keep talking, but that's basically it.
Great. Yeah, I look forward to hear more from you, Andrew. Craig, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Sure, happy to do so. Hello, everyone. Uh, and first of all, I guess, thank you to Min for organizing the session today. I'm looking forward to it. I'm a social scientist at the University of Texas at Austin, also one of the principal investigators for the Good Systems Grand Challenge, and have been involved with Good Systems for most of its duration, and have benefited a lot from that collaboration. I would say well, broadly speaking, my research sort of happens at the intersection of artificial intelligence and health. And so the projects that I tend to work on or lead these days have a health AI focus. And I would say, as it relates to this panel, and we'll get into some, specific, examples and illustrations of our work, but for the purposes of, I think, this discussion today, really thinking about, as AI becomes more and more expansive, more and more capable, more and more integrated into various aspects of our lives, including, the healthcare ecosystem, really thinking about and being intentional about how we design these systems, who we design these systems for, and what kinds of principles sort of guide and inform, right, how we design. And so we spend a lot of time talking with clinicians, but also talking with patients or patient advocacy groups to really sort of understand the sort of wide spectrum in terms of user needs, and how do you begin to sort of manage both the risk and also the opportunities. And so excited to share a bit about what we're beginning to learn and some projects that we're working on that are really oriented towards trying to understand how to build systems that are responsive but also responsible at the same time.
Thank you, Craig. Meg?
Thanks, Min. And thanks to UT Austin. I really respect the work coming out of the Good Systems Center, and it's great to be here. My name is Meg Young. I am a senior researcher and project director of the Algorithmic Impact Methods Lab at Data and Society Research Institute. And Data and Society is an independent nonprofit that focuses on how data-intensive systems could be put in service of the public interest. My work really focuses on trying to bridge the gaps between public agencies and the public, especially community-based organizations, advocates, and activists, to speak to some of the user needs in more robust way. And I work on different projects under the banner of participatory AI design and governance, ways that we're trying to pilot models for evaluating systems before they go out. And for me, this especially looks like working with the city government to encourage them to do more community engagement at the earliest phases of considering a new AI system, and especially with residents who are most at risk if something could go wrong.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Actually, a reminder for the audience, we're going to have a audience Q&A for the last 10 minutes or so. So if you have any questions throughout the panel, feel free to use a Q&A kind of feature, and then so that I'll be able to see the questions that you are interested in, so that I can kind of bring that up into our last 10 minutes or so. Okay. So now I'd like to kind of kick off the discussion posing the first questions. So where do you see opportunities for AI to support user needs and enable responsible innovation in your work? And I thought that we can start with Meg, kind of hearing your perspective on public sectors.
Thanks, Min. So a lot of folks aren't aware of how AI is being used in government right now. And part of the reason for that is that we're still in such early days of how systems are being developed and evaluated to understand their risks. There are so many different potential uses, but which ones are actually going to be useful to make government better is a work in progress. That being said, some of the common kinds of systems that we see are for risk scoring and prioritization. So, fire department deciding which of the buildings are most likely to need inspection sooner, or social workers deciding which cases are most at risk for further attention. There are also more people who need housing support than there is supply. So AI is being used to prioritize some people based on the risk factors. Another way that AI is being used is for optimizing, for example, traffic lights, or deciding if you are who you say you are, like in facial recognition or biometric identification. There's tons of administrative assistance and automation finally. So if you are a 311 department, how can you triage or try to offload some of the responses that you get? That is being done by AI. But the kind of AI that I'm most excited about as an opportunity is how to make it easier for people to access public services. Right now, our public services are set up to be very time intensive and burdensome, but AI might be able to help people simplify their paperwork, fill in forms, and ease that access for people with less mobility or time. And as far as other really exciting things happening in the public sector, I've noticed that there's a lot of evidence from the field so far that working with impacted communities on risk assessment before these systems go out is really working to identify some of these problems before systems are deployed, and they could lead to harms for people. So my work really focuses on participatory algorithmic impact assessment and ways to bring impacted residents or frontline workers into that evaluation process, and to understand where the blind spots that the people developing the systems might have missed. And with my last minute, I'll just share my favorite example of this work. Now, because people aren't necessarily specialists in AI, there's a common misconception that they're not prepared to give extremely essential insights about how AI works or how it should work. But that is not true. People have a lot of expertise from their own lived experience, from their own professions, that is currently missing in our AI development life cycle. And there's a great example of work coming out of Carnegie Mellon University by Kuo et al. 2023 with Hong Shen and Kenneth Holstein, that took comic books and broke down some of the key considerations in system design so that people who are actively experiencing homelessness or the staff that work with them could help identify what were the key parameters that the system was being developed with that would or wouldn't lead to good outcomes for the people who would ultimately be impacted by them. So I always refer people to this work just to show how easy it is to make these systems more visible and available for input.
Thank you, Meg. It's actually very exciting to hear kind of your overview of the use of AI and its potential opportunities. Andrew, how about your work?
Yeah, I think just to echo Meg's point about the opportunity or the need for academia and civil society to provide that kind of feedback and input, because I can say from inside Google, like those questions are just not asked, or like we can sort of lay down on the tracks in front of the developers, but we typically get run over. And so all these multi-angle ways of providing that kind of insight into how the tech is used and the kind of development decisions that need to be thought about, and not just optimizing, predictive accuracy or whatever the metrics they tend to rely on. So I think that's really crucial. In terms of our like specific some projects, we some of the work we do is working with quote unquote low resource language communities. And I know that framing, I hate that framing, but that's the technical framing in like an NLP. So it's just languages that don't have a lot of data online that have not been ingested into the models. But there's fragments a lot of these languages and the models are remarkable at seeming like they can speak these languages. So some of our work is involving working directly with endangered languages, indigenous languages, with people about it. And like to Meg's point about what's useful for them. And we find a range of reactions of like, leave us alone, please, or please help us. There's like 8 speakers left. Please, like, here's some data, and we want to use LLMs in education for, transmission of these languages and things, which I think is a really exciting possibility if this can be designed and like used with the needs of the community at the center. And Google's a giant organization, so there's the one kind of hysterical AGI race, but then there's also work going on where we've done the Unicode for the Cherokee syllabary, for example. And so there's a lot of these sort of side projects that I find really, if LLMs are really good for anything, it could be for stuff like this if it's designed or implemented, with active participation and partnership with these different communities.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. Craig.
Yeah, no, I love both Megan and Andrew's points, and want to echo those and sort of build on them. Maybe I could just, as one specific example, talk about a study that some of my colleagues and I did at the ICES Grad Institute here at UT Austin in partnership with Good Systems. We did a survey of safety net healthcare providers. And safety net healthcare providers, just for those who maybe aren't familiar with the term, are primarily healthcare professionals, providers who are providing health services to those who are either uninsured or underinsured. And so they are oftentimes sort of working in those spaces, be it rural or even urban populations, elsewhere, where access to healthcare resources are extremely limited. And so you can imagine, right, all of the complications associated with trying to deliver healthcare in environments like that. And we were curious to get their perspective on both the risk and the opportunities of deploying AI in the environments that they work in. And so we published a paper or a white paper, really a strategy paper that was commissioned by the Episcopal Health Foundation based in Houston. And just to share a couple of things, so the premise was, given the sort of challenges that safety net healthcare providers face, how could they envision or imagine the integration of AI into their environment? And and what particular kinds of expertise and experience do they have, which might be quite different from, let's say, researchers that we may meet and talk to at the Dell Medical School here at UT Austin. We've done some research with medical researchers at Stanford, Harvard, et cetera. Safety net environments are very unique and very different. And yet that perspective and those experiences are rarely, if ever, included into the creation or the design and development of health AI solutions. And so part of the sort of premise was, how would the approach to health AI look different? How would we design it, in ways that would be different and deployed in ways that would be different if you were incorporating the perspective and expertise of safety net healthcare providers? The premise being, right, that they would bring a lens, perspective, and experience that would be fundamentally different, more resource-rich environments. And so some of the concerns that they expressed, and there are many, and I won't get into all of them, but concerns about the sampling biases, so deploying AI systems in their environment that may not necessarily have been trained on, data or patient populations that resemble, the lived experiences and characteristics of the environments in which they work in. And so they were very much aware of the risk associated with those kinds of things. They also talked a lot about just inadequate training, but also inadequate infrastructure to deploy AI in a sort of a meaningful way. And so there were a number of challenges that they identified from the technical to the social to the infrastructural. But they were also very much aware what the potential benefits could be. Given that, and I'll just mention one, right? Given that safety net patient populations struggle to get access to healthcare services, you can imagine, right, an AI solution being able to remotely monitor, an AI solution being able to bridge that gap between, physical proximity to healthcare services. And so they were excited about the opportunity, right, to be able to design and deploy systems that might address and mitigate, some of those challenges that populations face, be they rural or urban, et cetera. And so the idea, right, so subsequent work is, how would you collaborate, to Meg and Andrew's point, collaborate with those in that environment to sort of see what's unique to that environment, and then how do you begin to sort of build and fine-tune models and systems that are deployable and, more importantly, right, relevant to the clinical environment, to the social environment. And so that was something, right, that was, quite striking for us in terms of just understanding a whole different perspective, a whole different experience, and how those perspectives and experiences might inform how we think about what's even possible with the deployment of AI for healthcare related purposes.
Okay, great. I'm glad that all of your answers are actually highlighting the importance and then actual benefits of involving the actual users or those who are impacted by the AI. And also, I think you are starting to allude to potential challenges and potential risks that can come from these efforts. So I wanted to kind of shift gear a little bit so that we can focus on the actual challenges that you face in your work. So what are the biggest challenges you face in your work, whether it's technical, organizational, social, or ethical? And let's start with actually Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, yes to all of that, what you just said. Like, there's organizational challenges, technical, ethical. I mean, like, we have to acknowledge, of course, like what Google is in the world. And when working with communities that, those of us in this area have a genuine interest in partnering with, there's always this, you know, like system we inhabit, and like it can be very difficult to negotiate trust, for example, like, and I'm not, people rightly are suspicious and are mistrustful at first, and so there's a lot of relationship building, and there's a lot of concern that and this is talked about also in other domains, but this kind of parachute research where here's some, ambitious, like idealistic Googlers that come in and then do their project, they get a pat on the back, and then they move on. And what does the community get out of this? So it's really about trying to understand what we can do within our own constraints and push back on those constraints, but then try to build these kind of partnerships, which can be difficult when you're part of this giant corporation, and then there's this kind of power differential is a huge challenge. And then internally, like we often get, why does this matter? Why is this important? What having to justify these projects to the people inside Google who are funding things and prioritizing things. And that, of course, waxes and wanes with the kind of external political environment. So our work was, very supported a few years ago, and now we have to rename everything, and we can continue the work. We just have to be more, I don't know, strategic or kind of, and then of course, and we can, there's a lot of interesting technical work that shows, for example, like if you prompt a model in English and ask about Chinese pop stars, it will make up a bunch of Chinese sounding pop star names. But if you prompt it in Chinese, it actually returns actual Chinese pop stars. So there's really interesting, like multilingualism is not just a good thing to do, but it seems to improve factuality and other types of things that you might be interested in. So those kinds of results can really sell it to our internal stakeholders if we can show like improvements across other things through this type of work with like low resource languages. So I can leave it there.
Great. So also, Andrew, you in the beginning, in the intro, you also mentioned the personalization. Do you want to talk a little bit about risk
Sure.
or challenges in it?
Yeah, like, in general, the context windows of these models is getting so huge that you can, eventually it'll be like every time you prompt a model, it'll kind of know who you are. It'll have a profile of you, and it'll answer you. Like you can say like, what was that restaurant I ate at in Tokyo last summer? And it'll be like, oh, you were here and here and here, and you liked this on the menu. So that level, like there's all kinds of privacy and ethical and cultural issues with that. But as the context window expands, I think it's something like 5 million tokens now. The amount of information you can pack in there and have the model sort of dynamically know who it's talking to on an individual level is going to be something we'll have to grapple with, I think.
Thank you, Andrew, for both sharing like organizational level challenges, but also new challenges coming from these new kinds of models. Meg, I wanted to also hear from you about the challenges in your work.
Thanks, Min. I think it's really helpful to hear from Andy about how it's hard from the industry perspective. I mean, I see how both government and companies are not set up for very participatory design processes right now. And so if you are in the work of trying to at least blueprint how it might work differently or try to steer the ship into a different lane, it's really slow, unwieldy work because some of that organizational infrastructure, even at the level of who is going to be having these complex conversations with community groups, that personnel doesn't always exist inside of these organizations. And so there's like a deep reskilling that needs to happen, as well as changing our understanding of the value of this input. I think for too long, the technologists have had a monopoly on this conversation as to what's salient for AI design and development, and they have not taken domain expertise, like the kind of work that Craig is leading, or impacted community expertise sufficiently into account. So just a challenge is making the case for the value of that information in a way that decision makers are prepared to take on board and really hear. And then once we get there, there's still a lot of missing social and organizational infrastructure that it will take to actually make that happen. So if we were in a setting where instead of just receiving ChatGPT and it's configured the same across a global context, you could actually have some sort of user level or community level real determinative say in the configuration of these systems. One question I'm interested in is how do you avoid that being a very duplicative process. How can the participatory design insights from one community be made more easily available to the other communities that could benefit from it without having that isometric application across all of these different global settings? Um, that's that's some of it, but even just on an everyday level, I see somebody in the chat who's asking, how do you have these conversations, especially about these complex technical topics? And one point of light that I like to take forward was developed by Upturn, and they found that if the users or if the communities just know the input data, the output of the system, the purpose of the system, and the data that it was trained on, that alone is enough for many different kinds of stakeholder groups to give really meaningful feedback as to the premise of the system, how it's being put together. And so, in spite of all the missing things, I think that the way to meet those challenges is to just give it a try. Give it a try to take the system that you're considering and putting it in front of some of the people who will be affected by it.
Great, thank you, Meg. Craig, in your research in academia, like what are the kind of challenges that you face in your work?
Yeah, there are many as you can imagine, and so at least a couple of the projects that I work on, we've tried to sort of move from just being research only to sort of design and kind of an application as well. So not only thinking about from a research perspective, how do you build responsible, ethical AI systems, but then also trying to compose teams to actually do that and work with end users and others to sort of design and deploy just to move from the research to I guess to more practice. Um, so a couple of things that we've learned. So for instance, in one project where we working with a computational psychologist and some others in sort of the maternal health space, um, deploying wearable technologies in the home um, to kind of monitor, for instance, the interactions between a mother and their infant. And the idea right here is really trying to think about, what are some of the underlying factors that are contributing to, some of the distressing patterns that we've seen over the last few years or so in terms of maternal health outcomes and um, and maternal health and well-being. And the idea, right, is that these wearable devices, right, which can capture all kinds of data, primarily audio data, but can develop algorithms to understand, right, the interaction between a mother and an infant, the frequency, the regularity, the emotional sort of sentiments and tones that are happening in those interactions, how quickly a mother might respond any number of things, right? And so on the one hand, really important sort of ecological sort of in the moment data that's, I think we would all agree is quite significant, right, in terms of being able to understand, what's happening in sort of, real world environments, real time. But one of the things that we've come to understand is that for a lot of potential users of a technology like this, substantial concerns about privacy, substantial concerns about how that data will be used, who has access to that data. You can imagine, right, for some populations who, for a variety of reasons, may be a little suspicious, right, of the healthcare establishment. Why for them, that type of data capturing and tracking is at least from their perspective, a form of potential surveillance. And so a lot of reluctance and resistance on that part. And so from a ethical and design challenge, right, it's what we've tried to do is spend more time, talking to care providers who work with these types of communities, but also talking to mothers as well, right, to get their sense, how could this be designed in a way that would make you feel less threatened? how could this be deployed in a way that could actually be a benefit to you as opposed to, as Andrew and Mega pointed out, not just a benefit to us as researchers or developers of the technology, but ultimately, right, I don't see the point in deploying something like this if it can't generate benefits for the mother, the household, the infant, and the space that they're in. And so those are both technical sort of ethical challenges. Just to give you an example of what is presented when you really try to think about deploying these systems in real world environments and what's at stake when you do so.
Great. Thank you for the great questions. I do have a lot of follow-up questions, but I want to make sure also we can answer kind of engage with audience and answer their questions. And looking at their questions, it seems like a lot of questions are actually about trade-offs. And then I think all of you talked about potential trade-off. We know that AI could potentially have this upside and opportunities benefit, but there is also huge risk, unknown risk about privacy, or maybe risk that I don't know. And some people are also mentioning word like AI-induced psychosis, etc. So I wanna summarize this audience question and ask you, the panel, how do you kind of handle these trade-off decisions? And how do you kind of use that knowledge to kind of think about important guardrails or kind of system? Like, how do you actually kind of use that knowledge to inform the actual AI design? Anyone wants to answer that first?
I'll start. Yeah, it's a great question. So there are many ways, obviously, to respond to the question, but so I just finished working on a project where we were sort of reviewing AI sort of governance, principles and kind of working with a couple of organizations who are really trying to sort of identify opportunities for them in this space. And one of them is a global pharmaceutical company, and they think about they have to think globally, right? And they have to think about serving, not just one profile or type of potential, patient, if it's drug discovery or some other, kind of innovation. Um, but one of the things that we talk to them about, right, is the need to, and I think more and more people are beginning to understand this, the need to, consistently monitor, how these AI systems are performing, right? Because they do have a tendency to drift. As Andrew has pointed out and Meg have pointed out, right? These systems are becoming, in some ways so capable in terms of just being able just to do things that even those who developed the systems didn't necessarily understand that they could do, or generating outputs or responding in ways that without proper assessment and evaluation could evolve into something, right, that isn't quite conducive to creating or responding to some of these ethical considerations. And so, I think, one thing is just to, continually sort of monitor and evaluate these systems, to, to routinely check to see, right, if they are generating disparate impacts, if they are performing, in ways where the differential harm, right, is very clear in terms of some populations being subjected to certain kinds of, prediction errors or other inaccuracies vis-a-vis other populations. And so I guess the point here, right, is that these systems obviously, right, aren't perfect, and even as they become more and more capable, they also, become more and more vulnerable too, right? Particularly if we defer more and more authority and decision making to them. There's certainly consequences with that. And so I think that the trade-off, right, is as we begin to integrate these systems into various workflows, various contexts and environments, also building those mechanisms to sort of continually evaluate, assess, improve, and manage, right, these systems in ways that protect against, disparate impacts, differential harms, things like this.
Yeah, I think or did you want to go, Meg? Sorry. I mean, I think those are great points. And it's a really interesting problem of when we cede sort of epistemic authority to these systems and why, and should we. I think there needs to be a lot more discussion around just I don't want to say like skepticism, but yeah, like critical awareness of, and maybe this gets to this literacy, the AI literacy question, which I struggle with somewhat, but just, what is data? How is data created? What are predictive models? Like, these are not difficult concepts. I think, like, I know there's Jeremy Wasom at Florida who does middle school data science curriculum, and I was telling her, like, you should bring this to Google and teach. But teaching middle schoolers like how classification works, how generative AI works, the fundamental concepts are the math. Once you get into the math and the implementation, it gets a bit tricky. But like these fundamental understanding of what is data, where does it come from, how do you get it, what are the assumptions that go into creating data. I think there's and of course the companies play a role in hyping this stuff up as if it's super powerful and magical, but I think um, somehow we need like a way to adjudicate, like Craig was saying, when when is it appropriate to trust the output of the model, and when is it appropriate to and to use your own judgment when you're like that can't be right. Your intuition's probably spot on, and don't defer to the system. But then this, like, it gets into this question of interpretability, and like, even when, and there's a huge debate in healthcare, like in imaging, for example, maybe it's more accurate, but you don't know why. And like, should the clinician defer to the algorithm that they don't understand? But there are cases sometimes when the algorithms is wrong for reasons that are very important to understand. So as these systems get more layered and complex, it gets more difficult to peel back the sort of layers of the onion. And the accountability is really difficult because you can't, in aerospace and even in medical devices, there's this concept of traceability in the sort of traditional systems where there's an output and an error, and you can trace back, in the stack, like what the root cause was. But with these giant models, that's not that's you can't do that. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges.
I would just add to what Craig and Andrew are saying, that we talk about trade-offs, and it's true that for any particular system, there could be different ideas about what is the objective and how can these two conflictious things be resolved. But I'm really interested in thinking about the entire holistic setting in which a system is being deployed. And it's really important to, first of all, just ask for the input of the people who are in the use loop, the people who are being impacted by it, and to show that you are being robust in the way that you're being responsive to their concerns. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where um, a lot of those loops are not, they don't exist. We're not hearing from impacted people before systems are going out the door. So first of all, just to show that that conversation is happening, and then second of all, it isn't always a black and white decision whether we use it or don't use it, but you could use it with some different operational controls or use policy or extra checking or human oversight, and there's an entire array of different socio-technical controls that could be introduced for a specific system to try to risk mitigate. And protecting people's rights or making sure that we achieve good outcomes is really non-negotiable. Someone asked a question in the chat about how concerning a lot of the examples that I gave of government AI are, and it's true that many of these are harmful and haven't been appropriately assessed. So changing the climate around AI adoption to be much more circumspect and careful is a really important outcome of this conversation.
So it seems like to me, all of your answers are highlighting the importance of kind of continuous conversation actually of stakeholder, and how do you actually provide infrastructure that we can, like multiple people, multiple stakeholders can monitor what's going on, and then continue this conversation based on actual data, actual evidence, actual impact on these systems. And so some of our audience asked the question about actually reporting the statistical met score, etc., disclosure. But I wonder, kind of bring these two topics together. What do you think is a needed like transparency of the system to enable this continuous monitoring or continuous involvement of stakeholder over the process? And I feel like you, Andrew, you might have some ideas because you're working on at a company that generates this model, whereas maybe like Craig and Meg, you're working more from, I guess, Meg, you can talk about maybe public sector use of AI and transparency there.
Yeah, I mean, so you might be familiar. There are efforts like these AI incident databases, but those are not standardized or very. I think they're good. They're really good starts. I would point to things like the pharmaceutical industry where you have it's called post-market surveillance, where you launch a drug and then there's a huge reporting or adverse event reporting system that's like mandated in many countries. And for example, I used to work at a big pharma company, and if I overheard a conversation in line in the grocery store about someone complaining about a headache and they reference one of the drugs, this was in Switzerland, but like I have 24 hours to report that to the adverse event system, and so that can be investigated. So we do have we have encountered this problem before, like in different sort of high stakes industries, and there's infrastructure and wait, but of course it took decades and a lot of issues to bring those about. So, and I do think the tech industry can be very, what I don't like, arrogant, like they tend to sort of reinvent things because they feel like they're the first ones to think of of all these things. So there's that looking outward to existing reporting systems and safety systems like in highly regulated industries, and that gets to this other question about around regulation and transparency. I do think there needs to be like a broader political discussion and will around these things, because the companies themselves are not, they have to be compelled to do some of these things just because it costs money and it's a lot of work, and like you would need to hire create like a sort of department to manage these things. But I mean, the odd thing is that of course, the data exists, like OpenAI, all these companies know how people are using the models and what they're doing. It's just and I would say even within the companies, it's not visible or examined really, so they're yeah, the infrastructure needs to just be put in place, and there needs to be more public mechanisms for achieving that, I think.
I wanted to add that those are really great ideas for enabling continuous monitoring. And I know that was what the question was about, but we are even having issues with transparency at that initial evaluation stage in the public sector. So just knowing some of the basics about how it was trained, how it was tested, in what settings, and reaching some consensus standards for how that reporting is done and what is essential for what's the bar that a tool must meet before it's considered ready for market. Those are still to be determined. And even very large city governments have had trouble getting straight answers from tech companies that they procure services from. And something I'm really excited about is an organization called the GovAI Coalition, which is being organized out of the city of San Jose, but now has grown to include over 900 state and local governments and other public agencies. And it's through their collective action to define what are the statistics that they'd like about any system that they're considering procuring, and pooling together and collectively saying that this is the information that we'd like to see. We're seeing a lot more vendors who are forthcoming because that standard has made it easier for them to be compliant and for there to be a real return on investment. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can look up the GovAI Coalition vendor fact sheets. And if it's missing essential information, you could also define what that could be and even shape what those consensus practices are.
Great. Craig, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just trying to find my mute button. I'll just add real quickly. Many here probably in the entire sort of gathering here. Many of you may have heard about this increasing call for creating almost the equivalent of nutrition labels for AI-based systems. And so, these labels would provide, in a very concise way, some of this kind of information that Andrew and Meg have alluded to that so you'd have a sense of, when and where the model was trained, what it was trained on, what are the potential risks. So think about, right, the kinds of labels that come with, in the nutritional context, or even with specific medications, right, where you kind of know the risk of taking that medication and you have some sense of at least some basic, kind of understanding of at least some of the particulars, if not all. And so it'll be interesting to see, right, to what extent that perspective gains even greater sort of traction and begins to become, part of the environment. I mean, it's hard to believe, right, that as these systems become more and more capable, more and more integrated, that there won't be some type of mechanism to really help inform and educate and support the public's understanding and engagement with these systems in ways that resemble, right, these other kinds of labeling practices, that are common in other domains.
Thank you so much. This has been really insightful. We are approaching the end of our session, so I wanted to invite each of you to share a 1 minute or maybe short, brief closing reflection. So think of this as a one message you want people to remember as they leave the session. So let's start with Craig, and then we'll go down the line to Meg and Andrew.
Yeah, I guess I'm increasingly intrigued by how do we build a much more AI literate, society and population. As we see large language models becoming more and more common, used for a wide range of things, really helping people develop a fairly basic, if not relatively sophisticated understanding of both what these models are capable of, but also what their limits are. Because I think once people begin to understand, right, what's really happening with these models, how they're generating their outputs, might inform how they go about using them. And something that among other things that I'm, thinking about is this the way that we continue to anthropomorphize large language models, treating them right as if they are humans, treating them as if they are partners, confidants, therapists, teachers, collaborators, when they're really something technically fundamentally different. And to the extent that we can understand that, right, it then might inform and support our engagement with these systems in ways that might allow us to exercise greater agency over those interactions, as opposed to the systems exercising their agency on us.
Yes, Meg?
Thanks. I'll be quick to say I agree with the idea of expanding AI literacy. And one of the kinds of literacies that I'm most interested in is really similar to civics. So some of us took civics. It's the way that we learned how to get involved in our government and what our responsibilities are. I'm interested in an AI civics. So what are the uh, avenues for power that everyday people can use to exercise more discretion over how AI is used in their workplaces, in their child's school, in their communities, and to include in all of our AI literacy programs as universities or in workplaces, as civil society organizations and libraries, a much expanded idea of these competencies to include our power as civic actors to help shape these systems and their use on the ground.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think yeah, Craig and Meg took my ideas. No, but I would really just emphasize this importance of not ceding your agency to these models and resist anthropomorphizing them and I don't know how to like achieve that at a societal scale. And I do think like some of the questions were about like, you know, psychosis and these risks. I think there are deep like social issues that make, you know, there's a vulnerability we have to these models because they're so fluent and like they seem so lifelike and human like and things. But you know, at bottom it's like a giant, it's like just a huge amount of numbers being crunched on giant servers. Like that's kind of all that's happening on the back end. So I don't, and there's a whole philosophical debate about like at what point are these things conscious and blah blah. But I definitely think like don't cede your agency to these systems and retain your critical awareness and like you know it's the kind of that fundamental enlightenment thing of like think for yourself. And so I guess that's um that sounds like very like abstract, but there's got to be ways that we can yeah enlighten ourselves and and not to say that these things can't be useful, you know. It's just I think with any large technology systems you have to be aware of its limitations and what it's actually doing. So yeah.
Great. Okay, so we are out of time. So thank you everyone for sharing such thoughtful and energizing insight. I know how busy you are all, so I'm grateful for each of you to kind of share your time, bringing your expertise, and being part of the discussion. I certainly got a lot of ideas actually for research. So I hope that for audience as well, this conversation sparked a new collaboration or new ideas and new initiative for doing this kind of important work with care. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Min. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good to see
man.
everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Matt Leese, and it's my pleasure to introduce the closing keynote of today's event. Ken Fleischmann is a professor, interim associate dean for research, and director of doctoral studies in the School of Information at the University of Texas at Austin. He is the founding chair of Good Systems, Ethical AI at UT Austin. His research on ethical AI has been supported by federal and local government, industry, and foundation funding, leading to over 130 peer-reviewed publications, 7 Best Paper Awards, and 3 Research Impact Awards. He is also the founding editor-in-chief of the ACM Journal on Responsible Computing. For this webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them during the talk. And at the end, I will read them out to Ken, and we can have a little dialogue there at the end. So we look forward to your questions and interaction at the end. Otherwise, I'm sure we have a great talk in store. Ken, please take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Matt. And hey, everybody. So, really looking forward to getting to talk about what we're doing here in Good Systems. So this is going to be a bit meta. So we spent these past couple days talking about all the exciting projects that we have in Good Systems in responsible AI. And today I'd like to talk about the process of building those collaborations, those partnerships, and how important that is to be able to do the kind of the work that we're able to do here in Good Systems. So it's really exciting to get to kind of take a step back, and there's a little bit of history here. There's a little bit of the future as well, but I think it's important to try to contextualize Good Systems in this way, and to again explore how to actually build a campus-wide research grand challenge like Good Systems. So Good Systems is one of 3 Bridging Barriers Research Grand Challenges. These were announced in 2016 at the State of the University address in 2016. And so the vice president for research, Dan Jaffe, as well as deputy vice president for research, Jennifer Lyon Gardner, and their team were charged by the president to create Bridging Barriers, a series of campus-wide research grand challenges driven by faculty and research scientists addressing and tackling some of the hardest questions in the natural and human-made worlds and the world of ideas. So one of the important things here was this top-down decision, rather than being an entirely top-down process. This was actually a very nice combination. So a lot of universities were doing grand challenges at this time, but they're doing it completely top-down. So the president, the provost would sit in a smoke-filled room and say, cancer and energy, that's what we're going to focus on as our grand challenges. What the administration here did, it was a top-down decision, but also a nice balance of the bottom up. So they brought together faculty originally in submitting idea papers, were over 100 submissions. Some were a few authors, some were hundreds of authors. And they ran the entire spectrum of what faculty thought were important grand challenges for UT Austin to try to tackle. And there were actually three Bridging Barriers Research Grand Challenges that were selected as a result of this. The first was Planet Texas 2050. Their grand challenge is making Texas resilient. The second is Whole Communities, Whole Health. Their grand challenge is changing the way science helps society thrive. And the third is Good Systems. And designing AI technologies that benefit society is our grand challenge. So it's important to note the balancing of the top down and the bottom up. So it was a top down decision to create this program. Of course, great leadership from the top is needed to drive any change in an organization. But at the same time, there need to be opportunities for bottom up input and feedback, and especially idea creation, especially when you have faculty as creative as the faculty at the University of Texas at Austin, and also with strengths in so many different areas. So that really makes a grand challenge like this possible and made this whole thing possible. So we were announced at the President's State of the University Address in 2019. Good Systems, the third Bridging Barriers Grand Challenge, will work to ensure that the needs and values of society drive the design of AI technologies. So that is what we've been doing for these past 6+ years. So our mission is design ethics-centered AI technologies that benefit society. We're looking at this globally, although, as I'll talk about in a minute, we started locally. We're focused on values-driven AI. So values like trust, transparency, fairness, accountability, and democracy need to be at the center of human AI partnerships, need to be integral to the design of AI systems. So these are the kinds of values that we embed across all of our projects in AI systems. Our research approach is focused on defining what it means for a system to be good, evaluating the goodness of systems, and building good systems. And the first part, defining, of course, we spent a lot of our time focused on defining the good part. It was not, as our former president gave feedback we heard at one point about, UT Austin shouldn't just be good, we should be great. We should be, exceptional, excellent. It's a different kind of good. So we're looking for benefiting society. We're looking for social good. So you first have to define that. Then you also have to define, of course, many different civilizations around the world over centuries have debated what is good in terms of human behavior. So thinking about how AI or robots should behave when there's such broad perspectives on what it means for humans to be good people, to be good members of their communities. is a really daunting and challenging task. But also there's the system part. And of course, we're looking at systems as human AI partnerships. So we're looking at them as socio-technical systems. But that was also something that we had very different perspectives and views across our team, which was one of the really interesting challenges that we faced early on. So that, shared challenge of building a common language is a really important aspect of building any collaboration. That's also true, of course, to being able to collaborate with AI. You have to be able to communicate. Of course, large language models have brought down those barriers substantially. But there are still a lot of cases where any entities, whether two different people or a human interacting with AI, there are going to be some communication challenges and barriers that will have to be overcome. The next is evaluate. So, it's really important that evaluation is not just done in a laboratory setting by scientists and engineers, but that's also has a community component, has a stakeholder component. So for us, it's really important that a good system is good for everyone, and especially that a good system benefits the people who are most directly impacted by that technology. So it's really important that we're getting a broad base of input in this evaluation phase. And that's actually going to be a big part of what I'll talk about today is the kinds of partnerships that we've been able to build through good systems. You've seen those over these past couple of days. You've seen some amazing partners who've been presenting on panels, discussing the ways that uh, different organizations have collaborated together to be able to build core research projects and have the success that we've had. Um, but again, that needs to be a really broad-based sense of evaluation. And then, once we've evaluated, we don't just stop there. We want to build. So we're focused here on um, actually designing AI-based systems. So we're actually putting things out into the world that are making a difference. So that's the whole define, evaluate, build pipeline that was the basis for our original research plan that we submitted as part of our creation of good systems and that has driven our research mission across these over 6 years. But I want to look at it a slightly different way, a meta way. And again, this is not just about, humans should collaborate with AI, but how humans need to collaborate with other humans to be able to build these human AI partnerships. Human AI partnerships require a lot of human-human partnerships to get started. And so that first step of the define phase is really about communication. So it's really important to build strong communication skills among the team. That communication is, I'd say, necessary but not sufficient to building trust. And building trust across the team is incredibly important as well. When you have a large group of faculty and students from all across campus, all working together, all with very different methods, uh, very different research styles, very different research outputs, and very different priorities for their research in terms of how theoretical or applied it's going to be. Sometimes, very expensive, costly research, sometimes very inexpensive scholar working on their own research. These are huge gaps to try to bridge. So bridging that is really important. And then agency, making sure that everyone's agency is respected through the collaboration and the collaboration serves everyone. So it's really important that we are doing more collaboratively. These are synergistic collaborations. They allow us to do more collectively than we could do individually. So that's a really important aspect of something like a grand challenge. So now I'd like to go through a set of slides. these are based on a book called Science in Action by Bruno Latour. My PhD is actually from the field of science and technology studies. And so what Latour was trying to get across in these examples was the idea that what we see as the end result of a scientific process often seems very fixed and static, but it actually was created over a period of time through a process. And this is the difference between studying what he calls science in the making, which is the actual process of doing science, and what he calls ready-made science, which is the sort of off-the-shelf textbook science, the thing that we all have come to understand. Principles like gravity. I think probably in most of our lifetimes, perhaps the COVID-19 pandemic has been one of the best examples of where we actually got to see science in the making in real time at a societal level, where the facts were shifting very dramatically in real time, and it was very challenging to know exactly what was the latest state of the art on the pandemic when it was, really at its origin times in 2020. So that's an example of this. And so Latour has three dictums. The first one is that in the process of doing science, you're basically saying get rid of all the useless facts. That's what allows us to get the facts straight. So it's the reductionism of science that allows us to narrow it down. So it wasn't in the apocryphal story the apple that landed on Sir Isaac Newton's head in a certain orchard in a certain year at a certain time, but it was the principle of that planets have gravity and they make things fall. A second dictum is the parallel between deciding on what efficiency should be versus just getting the most efficient machine. So there's a process of figuring out the efficiency that needs to happen before you can just say, get something that's efficient. So if you're thinking about getting an energy efficient appliance, there was work that had to be done to come up with those parameters of what energy efficiency means in this context, how to measure it, what devices were needed to measure this in order to be able to have those Energy Star ratings, for example. So for anything, when you actually look behind the scenes, when you come to understand the process behind how it came to be, that's a really rich process that's really important to explore and understand. Then his third dictum is so, on the one hand, in real time, you say the machine will work when all the relevant people are convinced. But then in hindsight, you can say, well, once the machine works, people will be convinced. So it's this idea of looking at what will be the culminating moment, what will be the sign of success, versus, okay, it's already proven, it's already done. So it's fascinating to me looking back to this work that I'd studied as a graduate student and thinking about the ways that I think it does correspond pretty well with the approach that we take in good systems in many ways. So this is I should have mentioned, this is the Roman god Janus. And so this is the sort of in the making is the more youthful Janus in action. And then we have the older Janus who's giving us the ready-made science textbook approach. So here we don't worship Roman gods, we do root for Bevo. So use Bevo here. And following the same idea of looking at good systems as a process versus a product. So that process is the process of doing the science of good systems, the engineering of good systems, the social science of good systems, the humanities of good systems, the arts of good systems. Um, were incredibly intellectually, disciplinarily, and methodologically diverse and rich. But this idea that we need shared definitions of good and systems to communicate across disciplines is now what gives us the confidence to say, after all this has been, fairly well settled at this point, and we've been working at this for many years, I think now we feel that we have shared definitions of good and systems that we can communicate. So that was really, what seems like a rather obvious thing was actually a process that took a process of communication, building trust, and then leveraging our agency and combining it into something that's larger than any of us individually. The second one here is on evaluation. That evaluation involves building shared trust across disciplines. So it's really important that, again, these disciplinary differences are really dramatic. And it's really challenging to even understand. I mean, that's the communication part, to even understand the work that people in other disciplines are doing, let alone to trust it. So that's really quite a leap of faith that one is taking in that context. But now we can look back and say, I trust our evaluations because they're interdisciplinary. I think that's one of the strengths, what is in many ways our greatest challenge in the process becomes our greatest strength as a product. That the work we've done to build something interdisciplinary means that when people see that in the world, they know that all of these different scholars from all these different fields have come together, and that's more impactful and meaningful. And when we have colleagues from our respective fields, they'll know we had a role in that and can help build trust in that concept. The third one, so this idea we need to build good systems that respect users' agency. And that's a really important part of this. It's really important that we're centering humans in this. Again, we've always, in good systems, advocated human AI partnerships where the human is intentionally put first in that partnership. So the human needs to play a key role here. We need to respect users' agency. AI should not be about putting people out of jobs, making decisions for people, and replacing people. AI should be about enabling all these different possibilities, different modes of creation and thought, creating new jobs, creating new opportunities for collaboration, creating new opportunities for how we can grow as a society. And, now we can say that users' agency is at the center of every good system that we've built. So that's something that's really important to us. As we've been doing all these projects, we've really centered the human in the human AI partnership. Interdisciplinary collaboration is really challenging. So when you try to get colleges, schools, units together, often it feels like there's a moat full of alligators that divides these units. There are so many perils, there are so many challenges that make it difficult to build these collaborations across the units. And this is where bridging barriers has been really successful. I think for all three, for Planet Texas 2050, Whole Communities, Whole Health, and Good Systems, that we've been able to build these bridges that actually do overcome the barriers between our respective disciplines and units and build mutually beneficial partnerships through this process. So that's something, and this, like many of the images, they're all credited as having been created with Copilot. Copilot hosted it a little bit here. You can see the feet underneath the bridge there. I like to think of this as an invisible bridge, maybe similar to the one in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It's kind of a leap of faith here. That I think in many ways this is that trust. It's a ultimate trust fall. That trust that you're putting into collaborators with such different training. There's no way that any of us could go. Most people are wise enough not to go back and get a second PhD. So we're usually constrained by our own disciplinary training. So we have to take a lot of things our colleagues say about their respective disciplines on faith. And we have to be willing to work together even when we don't fully understand exactly how another field works in order to be able to put the insights together to do things together that no one field could do on its own. So this is a diagram of our collaborations in our year one projects. We started in our first 2 years with 1 year projects. And our idea was we wanted some pilot projects, get things started, make some modest investments early on before eventually setting the overall major direction of good systems. And so you can see 13 different uh, schools and colleges and units represented here. And the breadth of this is just tremendous, but also the range of collaborations. So each node is a college, school, or unit at UT Austin, and each link is, if it's the thinnest links are where there is one project that was a collaboration where there were, say, architecture and nursing faculty collaborating with each other. Where you have a sort of medium width line is where you have two projects, and then a wider line like you see between the School of Information and the College of Natural Sciences, for example. That is where you had at least three projects that involved collaborations between faculty within those units. And it was required that projects had to involve faculty from multiple colleges, schools, and units. But the richness of this is just tremendous. Most projects involved three, four, even five fields. So the range of fields that's reflected here is just really tremendous. So I think it's impressive to see. Clockwise from the top, 12 o'clock, we've got the iSchool, UT Libraries, the College of Liberal Arts, the College of Natural Sciences, the Applied Research Lab, Cockrell School of Engineering, College of Fine Arts, Macomb School of Business, LBJ School of Public Affairs, Moody College of Communication, the Texas Advanced Computing Center, that's our supercomputing center, which is world class, uh, the School of Architecture, and the School of Nursing. So, again, being able to build these kinds of collaborative projects that connect all of these amazing connections that would be so hard to build without this top-down investment and this top-down decision to create the structure that would facilitate these collaborations, but also, again, the trust in faculty to, in a bottom-up way, organize and to lead on the intellectual side, to lead the intellectual development of these grand challenges. So as we started our set, or as we looked toward our second year, we wanted to do another set of 1 year projects, but we wanted to do something a little bit different from our just on campus projects. So we really focused on building a collaboration with the city of Austin. And of course, our tagline here at UT Austin is what starts here changes the world. But I think we're looking at it as, to change the world, we should start here. And so there were already ongoing efforts to build an interlocal agreement between UT Austin and City of Austin. Sherry Greenberg and the LBJ School of Public Affairs played a critical role in that. From the UT side, Charles Perma from City of Austin played a critical role in that from the City of Austin side. But we still had not reached any kind of agreement yet. We were still going through that process. But we decided we'd convene a workshop, and we had a workshop which brought together. These are smaller group discussions. The original workshop brought together about 40 faculty from UT Austin and about 40 staff from several different departments within the city of Austin. So, a very broad representation of these organizations. And this was really an opportunity for us to build this exciting partnership. We funded in our second year 7 projects that were collaborative between UT Austin and the city of Austin. So that was a tremendous opportunity to jumpstart those collaborations, partially through this workshop, which the one on the left was the original workshop that we held in February 2020. So we just got away with having that right before the start of the pandemic. And the one on the right actually is an offshoot of that. It's a subsequent workshop that we had as a result of this original and some of the work that was done in that second year. So really led to some exciting projects, two Metro Lab Innovations of the Month, two NSF Civic projects, among others. Then we built a similar collaboration with MITRE, held a similarly large workshop. We have better photos from this one. So also, I think this was about 40 UT researchers from across campus and at least 20 researchers from all over the world at MITRE. MITRE is a very distributed organization, but that's led to some really productive collaborations between MITRE and Good Systems. You'll see that reflected in a moment when I talk about some of our current collaborations. But just some really exciting projects, exciting opportunities. We really value our partners, including MITRE and City of Austin. Another is the Public Interest Technology University Network. Also in, in early spring, in March 3rd and 4th, 2020, we got away with having probably one of the last in-person conferences before a lot of people were quarantining for at least a few weeks. But we brought together representatives from 30 different universities, as well as folks from industry, from nonprofits, and from government. Um, Again, this is through the Public Interest Technology University Network, which is convened by the Ford Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, and New America. So this was a really exciting opportunity to build community and to share some of what we're doing here at UT Austin with a number of our academic peers. Other partners, one critical one has been the UKRI Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Hub. So those are our primary collaborators in the UK. And we actually hosted a joint conference here last year, I believe. We have a special issue of the ACM Journal on Responsible Computing that's going to come out soon based on that work and that event and that collaboration, that partnership. Also, we collaborated with Cantelos Group to organize a workshop as part of an effort that NIST is doing, the National Institute on Standards and Technology. And so that is providing input into the federal government. I'll talk a little bit more about federal government involvement as well. But just, important range of partners that we've been able to cultivate and build connections with through the process of Good Systems. And we have a robust set of programs. Of course, you're here right now at our virtual conference. We have a annual symposium, which is happening in person, and that's going to be co-located with and in collaboration with both Texas Robotics and the Machine Learning Lab here at UT Austin. So we're really excited. Again, those are further partnerships that we're building through this process. It's, this is something that's very important to us to actually try to make a difference in terms of, I'll have some slides on policy engagement coming up, for example. Our core research projects, of course, you just met some of our core researchers and some of their key stakeholders and collaborators and colleagues. But we have exciting research projects in designing AI to advance racial equity, in being watched, embedding ethics in public cameras, a good system for smart cities, living and working with robots, designing responsible AI technologies to protect information integrity, and the core research project that I'm co-leading, Smart Hand Tools, building the future of work with ethical AI. So these core research projects, now you remember the one from year one projects. This is even bigger, even richer. So now we're up to 14 colleges, schools, and units. And you can see now the blue are some of our partners, only a small subset of our partners. So the rule I used was they had to be listed in the annual reports of at least two of the core research projects. So you can see City of Austin and MITRE, who had mentioned is doing collaborative workshops earlier in Good Systems, as well as Microsoft Research and Google. But there are a huge number of organizations, in Smart Hand Tools. We've been really fortunate to partner with the City of Austin, but also with Austin Community College and also with Texas AFL-CIO. And every core research project has made some amazing partnerships through their projects. But to see the richness of the collaborations, the number of ties, the number of core research projects, including the number of thick ties, core research projects that are have multiple collaborations among these different schools and colleges units across UT Austin is really remarkable and impressive. I think this is a testament to the work that we've done and what we've been able to accomplish to sort of this is quite a bridging pattern to be able to weave this pattern across campus. So now anyone who joins UT Austin wants to know for this aspect of responsible AI, where should I go? We're very easily able to connect folks through this process. And we also have cross-cutting research themes. And so they include AI alignment, work at the human AI frontier, and knowledge, generative AI, and power. So by the numbers, actually, I think, yeah, so I think it's 147. Sorry, this is a little bit, this is not the latest numbers, but we've been, quite successful in building out our network. We actually have an ongoing effort now. We had an open call for the campus, and we're going to be selecting winners, announcing those relatively soon, so later this semester. So we'll have even more new projects being funded by Good Systems. And we've been able to benefit from our location here in Austin, Texas, of course. This is a growing tech hub. There are so many different stakeholders here, also the seat of city and county, as well as state government, and right, pretty much right between the coasts. So definitely a great setting from which to try to achieve a responsible AI grand challenge. We've also had a number of educational offerings. So this has been an important thing. We want to bring what we learned through our research into the classroom. So that started with what we call a signature course here at UT Austin, and has evolved into a really exciting course, Essentials of AI for Life and Society. This is a AI literacy course that Peter Stone and Joydeep Biswas have created. And it's within CS, but the very first offering was a one-credit course that anyone at UT, including undergraduate and graduate students, as well as staff and faculty, were welcome and encouraged to take. And it's our belief that AI literacy is a really critical literacy for the present and the future. Also, with Zhenfang Zhao's leadership of a NSF Research Traineeship or NRT grant, we're able to build a graduate portfolio program in ethical AI, and that brings together students. It's open to students all across campus. So any student pursuing a graduate degree can complete this graduate portfolio. It's part of their academic record, shows the work that they're doing in ethical AI, includes both coursework and a project. And then finally, we partnered with the Institute for Foundations of Machine Learning, part of their, which is the first, one of the first NSF AI institutes, recently renewed, happily. And so we partnered with them on their ethics and education plans, and they created a $10,000 master's degree that's open to applicants around the world in AI. And so that master's in AI has one technically required course, which is ethics in AI. So that's a really exciting aspect of that partnership, to make sure it's a commitment that every student graduating with an AI degree from UT Austin has education and training in ethical AI. And I'm actually doing research right now as a Microsoft AI Economy Institute fellow, studying the impacts of this course after students have graduated. So, yeah, really exciting exciting things going on here in the education space. We're also embarking on a collaboration, a partnership with enterprise technology. So we've been we're working on accessibility, energy efficiency, classroom use, and policy development in relation to the campus-wide adoption of AI. So it's really exciting to study something as important as the campus-wide adoption of AI in real time. And we've also been able to have an impact in government. We talked about City of Austin, but here is Matt Leese presenting to the Select Committee on AI and Emerging Technologies. Both Matt and Sherry Greenberg, I believe, maybe others in Good Systems as well, were involved. And this helped to uh, lead to the successful uh, uh, passage of the Texas Responsible AI Governance Act, TRAGA, which was just passed into law earlier this year. So that's an example of good systems having an impact on legislation at the state level and also at the federal level. This is a tour that several of our Good Systems members, Matt Leese, Peter Stone, Luis Santos, where I believe this is with the deputy chair of the Joint Chiefs. So, really high level uh, access and impact that we've been able to have. So looking forward, we are looking toward building a permanent interdisciplinary hub for responsible AI, ET Austin. We're going to advance research innovation, continue to grow these kinds of mutually beneficial partnerships, continue to hold our role as a leader in AI ethics education, serve as a trusted resource on responsible AI across UT and the community, continue to influence AI policy, and also, of course, path to commercialization. So these are just a few of the things in the future for good systems, which we're really excited about. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to taking your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. So yeah, if anybody else has any further questions, please continue to add them to the Q&A. So just to get started, Ken, one of the things you talked a bit about, I mean, really the focus of your talk was sort of building these collaborations and across groups. How is it that we can successfully, empower stakeholders who aren't technologists to really understand and advocate for the kinds of systems they would like built for them? And at the same time, help the technologists to really, understand well the stakeholder viewpoint. How is it that you make these sorts of challenging collaborations fruitful when you bring such diverse stakeholders to the table together?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. That's a great question. So, I mean, this is the power of communication and collaboration, which is not easy. But trying to understand, I've found across my career, I've always been a very interdisciplinary researcher, and I've always enjoyed interdisciplinary collaborations, and I've learned the difference between multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. So multidisciplinary is, um, a bunch of researchers each do their own thing and then staple it together at the end. But truly interdisciplinary, we really stop to try to understand and appreciate the perspectives, the methods, the concepts, the goals of our respective research areas. So I think that's where it has to start. It has to start. And again, this is part of that process of building trust that allows our agency to expand beyond the walls of our fields. So this has really allowed many of us to publish in venues we would never publish. I'm not sure you were planning on, like a career in testifying at state hearings that lead to new laws being passed, but it's an awesome thing that you've accomplished as part of Good Systems. So I think these are, uh, yeah, you have to take the time to learn to communicate, to learn that shared language as we've done, uh, take the time to really build that kind of informed trust of understanding where someone is coming from. In the Smart Hand Tools project, we've done a lot of user testing with end users and then fed that back to our engineering collaborators. And so this is sort of requirements gathering. Um, but these stakeholders go beyond just the end users in a lot of cases. Um, so you need to think about everyone who's impacted by an AI technology and have a very broad way of looking at that.
Great. Another question I think a lot of people always are interested in is when we talk about responsible AI, everyone says, how can we not stifle innovation? How can we really spur innovation, let it go and really be, world leaders in AI development? At the same time, there's this responsible angle. We want to make sure that, we aren't trying to recover from problems after they happen after the fact. So what have we learned or do we know, through the journey here about how is it that we can try to really maximize the benefit of that AI can bring to society while we still try to, mitigate, prevent those risks and harms?
Yeah. So I think it's pretty clear we're not really going to, even if we wanted to slow down progress of AI, it's hard to see that really happening on a global scale. So we're really going to have to speed up our process for understanding their risks and get a lot faster at anticipating those risks and what the consequences might be before they actually happen. One, pretty tragic case of this, but um, we had some cases with social media, and this is an example I used to give when people would say, why is ethical and responsible AI important? Why should we care? Why does this matter? And I would say, well, look at social media, because social media evolved in this really rapid pace with very few controls, with not a lot of attention paid to it. We've had so many societal impacts, but the one here is cyberbullying and the degree to which there's been harm caused, and there have been teenage suicides that have resulted from social media use. And that was the answer I would give years ago was we don't want that happening with AI. And then I got a media inquiry recently to give quotes in relation to teenage suicides that were alleged to have been related to teenage use of generative AI tools, large language models. So, I mean, in that sense, I wish we could have been able to do something sooner and faster for that. It's one thing to be able to see a potential problem, another thing to come up with a solution in real time. But I hope as AI evolves that we'll come up with more rapid ways to respond as a community, as a society, that will be able to um, better prepare the public for the impacts that AI may have and better prepare AI companies to be responsible actors and to make sure to do everything they possibly can to avoid those kinds of tragedies.
Yeah, Nicholas Carlini from Anthropic gave a keynote at Column a couple of months ago. And one of the things he was talking about was the community thinking about risks and AI harm seems to be a bit bifurcated. There are people who are really worried about, AI having existential risk for humanities. And part of Carlini's thesis, as I understood, was that these two communities, while they have sort of disparate ends, a lot of what they really should be doing in the near term is the same thing. And maybe if they spent a little less time disagreeing with one another, we could work together toward advancing some of these aims together. So when you look at this sort of landscape of sort of long-term existential risks or short-term harms that we're facing today, is this something that we really can work together in tackling all this, or do these really take us in very different directions?
I think that, I mean, that's something we've been really good at in good systems is bringing this all back together. And I mean, across these core research projects that are in such distinct areas, and we're working with very different stakeholders, and the goals of the projects are quite different in this way. But at the same time, we can find uh, values that are shared across these projects where we're prioritizing the same values, trying to preserve the same human values in the design of different AI systems. So there's a lot we can learn from each other. So I definitely agree. I think we're stronger, and this is the whole uh, spirit of the scientific approach. We're stronger by sharing the work that we're doing and uh, trying to build something larger. So this was, I mean, to me, I think this conference is a very nice step in that direction of building something larger across the core research projects of good systems and even beyond good systems, what we need to focus on in responsible AI.
Terrific. Maybe one last comment, and then I know we're a couple minutes over, so I don't want to keep people going longer. So it sounds like Good Systems has um, sort of, I guess, brought together maybe a pretty diverse group of stakeholders, both within disciplinary within the university, but also you talk about sort of a combination of bringing together corporate interests, government sectors, something like this. When you reflect on how Good Systems compares with some of the other responsible initiatives, responsible AI initiatives or organizations that are acting out there, you know, what do you see either as, different or similar here? To what extent can, Good Systems really partner effectively with some of these others, or what really new and different here? I mean, I think you mentioned there was the task hub that, for instance, the group's already pretty involved with.
Yes, and we are actually Good Systems, and Chandra Bhatt and Sam Baker's leadership has been building a group of like-minded research initiatives at U.S. universities. So we have several partners. There have been multiple in-person convenings of that, and so I think there's definitely um, a lot of opportunity to build community there. Um, so yeah, I think absolutely. Um, I think in terms of what differentiates us, I mean, there's a lot that brings us together, and I'd probably rather focus on that because again, there's so much we can learn from each other. But I mean, that is something that we've discussed and something that's it's always been on my mind. And I think part of it was really fun about making those network diagrams of the connections across the different units of UT Austin, and again, perhaps even more to join through our open call right now. Um, that the broad base of collaboration, which I think the degree to which UT Austin has strengthens so many different aspects of the academic enterprise. I think that, and I think incredibly well balanced. So I think a lot of initiatives tend to be dominated by one field or another. I think we've really been able to maintain our balance. That's something I'm proud of, our broad base and balanced intellectual interdisciplinary perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken, for a really interesting talk today and for all the work, you've done to try to help, advance responsible AI for our field. So at this point, let's wrap up our keynote. Thanks, Ken, for being here, and I'll turn it back over to the conference organizers for any closing comments.
Great. Thank you, Ken, for closing us out with a great keynote talk, and thanks, Matt, for the conversation. I just want to thank all of our attendees for joining us for this two-day conference on responsible AI. Whether you joined us for the full event or dropped in for the session that interested you most, we really hope that you learned something that you'll take back with you to your respective research networks or communities. Ken did a great job at providing an overview of our interdisciplinary research Grand Challenge. On behalf of Good Systems, I would like to invite you to stay connected with us. In addition to the work within our research portfolio that Ken described, we host events like this one that are free and open to the public. Many of those are in person here at the University of Austin, or the University of Texas at Austin. But one of those that's coming up, in fact, is this spring. That's our annual symposium that Ken also alluded to. That's March 3rd and 4th. So if you're interested, please do save the date. You can sign up for our mailing list to learn more about our research or to attend one of our events, or follow us on LinkedIn or on X, or feel free to get in touch with us directly if you're interested in getting involved. Our email address is here. With that, I would like to thank all of our speakers once again and our audience for your participation. We hope to see you at a future event. Thank you.